Imagine a small creature that looks like it just wandered out of a dream. Eyes a little too big. A smile that is a little too sharp to be simply cute. It is not a cartoon you grew up with. It is not a familiar mascot. It feels like something half remembered from childhood, and yet entirely new. This is Labubu. At first, it appears like a harmless toy, a plastic figure barely the size of your hand. But then something begins to happen. Shelves empty in hours, long lines form in front of stores. Videos flood TikTok, people holding them, unboxing them, whispering about how rare they are. Prices triple, then quadruple. And suddenly, this strange little creature becomes something more than just a figure. It becomes a symbol. Why? Why this one? Why now? The truth is, none of this happens by accident. What you are looking at is a textbook demonstration of how desire is created, how an object becomes a magnet for the human mind. Think about it. It starts with scarcity, limited editions, drops so small that even seeing one feels like luck. That feeling of, I might never get another chance, flips a switch inside us. And then you see other people waiting in line, posting pictures, talking about it. You start to feel that quiet pull, that little voice saying, if everyone else wants it, maybe I should too. And the creature itself, it is designed for this. Big, round eyes that trigger the part of the brain wired to protect infants. A face that is cute, but just strange enough that you can't look away. It sits in your mind like a melody you can't stop humming. You tell yourself it's just a toy, but somewhere inside, a part of you already knows that it isn't. It is turned into a key, a ticket into a hidden club. Soon, people aren't just buying Labubu. They are collecting, trading, hunting. Entire communities appear overnight. It is no longer about plastic. It is about belonging, about being part of a story, about holding in your hands an object that whispers, you are one of us. And this is where the real trick begins. Because the frenzy is not about Labubu at all. It is about how easily the human mind can be guided, nudged, persuaded. In the next few minutes, we will step quietly behind the curtain. We will slow everything down so you can see it clearly. The hidden levers that turn a toy into an obsession. The same levers that shape what we buy, who we follow, even what we believe. So, lie back. Listen carefully. And as we move past this strange little figure, you may start to see something bigger. The patterns, the triggers, the invisible strings that have been there all along. The first thing to understand about a phenomenon like Labubu is that it does not start with you. It starts long before the first box ever reaches a store shelf. Somewhere, in an office you will never see, someone decides that only a few pieces will be released. Not too many. Just enough to make it feel like a whisper, like something you must chase. Scarcity is one of the oldest levers of influence known to psychology. When we are told something is rare, the mind instantly gives it more value. Not because of logic, but because of instinct. Thousands of years of survival wired us to desire what is hard to find. Food, water, shelter. In the modern world, that same mechanism works for objects. So the first drop comes. It is small. It sells out in hours. And that is exactly what it was meant to do. You see the empty shelf? And something quiet shifts in the back of your mind. If it's gone, it must have been good. If other people got it, maybe I missed something important. And then a second drop comes, even smaller. People rush to grab it. Videos appear, hands opening boxes, faces lighting up. You watch and you feel a twinge of urgency, the fear of missing out. What if the next one comes and I am too late again? That is when hype begins to form. Not from advertising, not from billboards or loud campaigns, but from you. From ordinary people talking about it, posting it, whispering to each other. The scarcity has already planted a seed, and now the crowd waters it. And without noticing, you begin to change your behavior. You check release dates. You look at videos of strangers unboxing small toys you never thought you cared about. You start to want one. Not because you need it, but because the idea of not having it feels unbearable. It feels as if everyone else has been led into a secret party. And you are still outside, listening to the music through the door. This is the genius of controlled scarcity. By giving less, they make you want more. And with every limited drop, the object moves further away from being a toy and closer to becoming a status symbol. And so the craze grows, not from logic, not from taste, but from an ancient reflex we rarely notice until it already has us. And that is only the beginning. Because once scarcity has pulled you close, another force takes over, one that is even harder to resist. The force of the crowd. When scarcity has already set the trap, something else begins to grow around it. At first, it is small. A few photos, a few videos, one or two people showing the little creature they managed to find. But the human brain was built for patterns. It notices what others notice. When more and more faces start to appear online, smiling with the same strange toy in their hands, something deep inside whispers, maybe this is important. Psychologists call it social proof. It is the quiet voice of the herd, guiding us without a single word. If everyone else wants it, if everyone else is doing it, maybe I should too. It is not just the toy you see. It is the excitement in their voices, the comments filling up under their videos, the feeling that a party is happening somewhere and you are the only one still standing outside. Algorithms know this as well. Platforms do not show you what is balanced, they show you what spreads. So with every scroll, the creature appears again. Labubu in another hand, Labubu in another room. Labubu unboxed, painted, traded, cherished, until it seems like everyone else already belongs to a club that you are not a part of yet. And the more people gather around it, the less the object belongs to itself. It starts to turn into something bigger, not a figure, but a passport, a key to join the stream, to step into a shared ritual. This is how a trend stops being an object and becomes an environment. It wraps itself around you. You do not even need to buy it yet. It is already there, in your feed, in your mind, in your friends' voices. And soon, the pull is no longer coming from the company that made it. It comes from people like you. People who post, share, and talk. Without meaning to, they do the work for free. Crowds build their own gravity. And when that gravity grows strong enough, it bends even those who promised themselves they would never care about a toy. The herd effect is not loud. It does not scream. It simply shows you, over and over again, that everyone else has already chosen. And in the end, almost without noticing, you choose too. Why this toy? Why not another? The answer is hidden in its shape. Look closely at Labubu. The first thing you notice are the eyes. Large, round, and bright. Far too big for the small body that carries them. Scientists call this the baby schema. It is a pattern so ancient that it bypasses thought. Big eyes, small nose, a certain softness. And your brain releases a quiet wave of care. You feel the need to protect, to hold. But that is not all you see. Because something about this creature is off. grin is too sharp, the ears a little too long. The expression is both innocent and mischievous at the same time. And this combination, cute yet unsettling, holds you in place. It makes you look longer than you mean to. Your mind cannot decide whether it is safe or strange, and so it circles, trying to make sense of it. This is not an accident. Designers know that perfection is forgettable. Symmetry, balance, and normal proportions vanish from memory almost as soon as you look away. But add a small imperfection, a note of surprise, and suddenly the image stays. The human brain loves patterns, but it loves them most when they almost break. It is why a catchy tune often has one wrong note, a pause that does not belong. It is why faces that are just slightly unusual feel more alive than the ones that are flawless. Labubu lives in that space, half cute, half chaos, a playful ghost with a child's eyes. It triggers two currents in you at once, approach and curiosity, and just a flicker of unease. You might laugh at it. You might think it is silly. But once you have seen it, you will find yourself thinking of it later, without meaning to. And that is where the power lies. Not in the plastic, not in the paint, but in the idea that has now taken root in your mind. A strange creature that feels a little like home and a little like something from another world. This is how the trap closes. By the time you notice it, the image has already become part of your inner landscape, and you will begin to look for it in stores, in videos, in conversations, without even knowing why. By now, something important has changed. Labubu is no longer just a small figure on a shelf. It has crossed an invisible line. At first, it was about owning a thing. Now it is about being part of something. People begin to meet because of it. Online groups form. Collectors trade stories about how they found theirs, how long they waited, how rare it is. They share tips, compare editions, even travel to events just to stand in a line together. And slowly, the object becomes a mirror. It no longer reflects the creature. It reflects the owner. Holding one says something. It whispers, "I was fast enough, clever enough, connected enough to get this before it disappeared." It becomes proof, a badge, not just of taste, but of status. Then comes the second wave. Resellers, auctions, prices climbing higher with each release. Some buy to keep, others buy to flip. But the result is the same. The figure moves further away from being a toy and becomes an investment. And yet, even in this, there is a strange intimacy. Every time someone posts a picture, every time they show the little creature on a desk or a shelf, they are advertising, not for the company, but for the tribe. This is how the cycle feeds itself. Scarcity makes you look. The crowd makes you want. The design makes you remember. And then the community makes sure that the fire never burns out. There is no billboard that could compete with this. No single ad campaign that could reach this deep. Because now, the work is done by people. People like you, who tell their friends, who share a picture, who talk about drops and editions, until even those who were never interested begin to wonder if, maybe, they should be. What started as a quiet toy has become a ritual, a way of saying, "I belong." And in that moment, when an object becomes a symbol, it no longer matters what it is made of. Plastic, resin, paper. What matters is what it means. And meaning is the most valuable currency of all. And now we are here. A creature that began as a sketch on someone's desk has become a global obsession. What does that tell us? It tells us something simple and also unsettling. Our choices are rarely as free as they feel. Scarcity tugs at one thread, the crowd pulls another. Design, community, and the hunger to belong tie more knots until, without noticing, you are moving in a direction that you never chose on your own. Most of the time, we do not see the strings. They are too thin. We only notice the pull, the sudden urge to check a store, the little sting when you see someone else holding what you do not have. The quiet voice that says, maybe I should just get one, just to see what all the fuss is about. And it does not end with toys. The same levers shape the shoes people wear, the shows they binge, the headlines they share, the opinions they hold. Once you start to look for it, you will see it everywhere. This does not mean you have to stop liking things. It does not mean you should resist every trend. It simply means be aware, because the moment you can see the pattern, you are no longer fully inside it. So, as you close your eyes for a moment, think about this. When was the last time you wanted something just because everyone else seemed to want it? When was the last time you felt the pull of the crowd without knowing why? Labubu is just a mirror. It shows how easily desire can be planted. And once you see that, you will start to see the same seeds everywhere. And this is where our path begins to widen. Because these are not isolated tricks. They are part of a much larger field, the hidden mechanics of influence, the psychology of persuasion, the quiet ways that people, companies, and systems shape the way we think and feel. So, stay with me. Keep listening. And as we leave this strange little creature behind, let's step deeper into that hidden architecture, into the world of manipulation itself.
What if the thoughts you believed were your own, were never yours to begin with? In a world saturated with media, authority, rituals, and influence, the human mind is less free than it appears. Every day, without realizing it, we absorb invisible instructions. We're nudged, persuaded, manipulated, subtly, systematically, and often willingly. The tricks used to control minds aren't always brutal or obvious. In fact, they often arrive in the form of comfort, praise, logic, or even love. And the more familiar they feel, the harder they are to detect. This isn't about wild conspiracy. It's about psychological architecture, how belief systems are built, how desires are planted, how obedience is framed as freedom. Through 25 disturbing paradoxes, we'll expose the subtle techniques used to shape behavior, cancel thought, and install illusions so seamlessly that resistance feels irrational. You may find these paradoxes in your workplace, your relationships, your country, and if you're brave enough, in your own mind. Because once you understand these tricks, you'll see them everywhere. And that knowledge might not bring peace. It might bring discomfort, but it will bring clarity. Let's begin with the first paradox. Is a paradox where truth became weaponized into division, truth that divided instead of united. Truth is supposed to be the great unifier, the solid ground we can all stand on, the light that clears away confusion, the shared reality that binds us. In every era, truth has been championed as the answer to ignorance, illusion, and manipulation. We believe that once people know the truth, they'll come together. That truth leads to understanding, clarity, and unity. But in today's world, something strange has happened. The more people insist they've found the truth, the more divided we become. This is the paradox, truth that divided instead of united. At first, this seems impossible. How can truth, which is by definition singular, cause fragmentation? Isn't the problem that people are rejecting truth, not that truth itself is creating conflict? But the reality is more complicated. In the age of information, everyone has access to facts, but those facts are curated, reframed, packaged by algorithms, by ideologies, by personal biases. We no longer engage with truth as a collective endeavor. We consume it as a personal product. This leads to what some call customized reality. Two people can look at the same event and walk away with entirely different conclusions, not because the event changed, but because the lens through which they viewed it did. News feeds, social platforms, search engines, they show you what aligns with your past behavior. Over time, you're not discovering truth, you're being reinforced. And with each layer of reinforcement, your version of truth hardens, not into wisdom, but into identity. When truth becomes identity, it becomes dangerous. Why? Because now disagreeing with someone's truth feels like attacking who they are. Debate is no longer about ideas, it's about survival. And when truth becomes a battlefield, people don't seek understanding. They seek dominance. They don't want to learn. They want to win. We see this everywhere. In politics, where facts are weaponized to score points, not find solutions. In activism, where purity tests decide who's really on the right side. In personal relationships, where each person insists on their version of what really happened, unable to hear the other without feeling invalidated. Truth becomes tribal, and the louder each tribe screams their truth, the further we drift from one another. This is how truth fractures us, not through lies, but through certainty. The paradox deepens because everyone believes they're on the side of truth. No one thinks of themselves as misinformed. Everyone has evidence. Everyone has quotes, screenshots, statistics, lived experience. And so, each side believes the other is deluded, dangerous, or dishonest. Conversations become impossible. Bridges burn, echo chambers deepen, and instead of arriving at shared truth, we become strangers living in parallel realities. This isn't just a digital problem. It affects families, friendships, communities. Parents and children stop speaking. Siblings avoid each other at holidays. Longtime friends silently drift apart. Not because of what's true or false, but because truth has become a weapon, not a tool. So how do we escape this paradox? We must first distinguish between truth and certainty. Truth is a process. It evolves, deepens, adapts. Certainty is a fixed state, rigid, closed, defensive. When you hold truth gently, you remain open to correction, to learning. When you grip it tightly, you're no longer in search of reality. You're in a fight for control. Second, we must return to shared inquiry. That means approaching truth not as something we own, but something we uncover together. It means being willing to say, I could be wrong, and genuinely meaning it. It means listening not to reply, but to understand. It means asking, not just asserting. Third, we must question our sources. In the modern age, information is endless, but context is rare. Before we declare something as truth, we must ask, where did this come from? Who benefits from me believing it? Is this truth, or just a narrative dressed as one? This humility is not weakness, it's intellectual integrity. Most importantly, we must prioritize relationship over being right. If your version of truth costs you every meaningful connection in your life, then it may not be truth at all. It may be a wall. Truth should illuminate, not isolate. It should bring people closer, not drive them into corners. This doesn't mean compromise on core values. It doesn't mean tolerating harm or erasing boundaries, but it does mean holding space for complexity. It means recognizing that multiple truths can exist side by side, that your truth and someone else's aren't always in competition. Sometimes they're two windows into the same confusing world, and maybe that's the most honest truth of all, that we are each carrying pieces of a shattered mirror, and none of us can see the whole reflection alone. Next is a paradox where choices were never truly yours. Choice that wasn't yours. We live in a world that worships choice. From the food we eat to the careers we pursue, from who we date to what we believe, freedom of choice is hailed as the ultimate expression of individuality and autonomy. You can be whoever you want to be. The choice is yours. These mantras are everywhere, and they sound empowering. But there's a chilling paradox hidden beneath them. What if the choices you make were never really yours to begin with? What if the options you pick from have already been pre-selected, pre-packaged, and psychologically steered, so that your free will is actually a controlled simulation? This is the paradox of manufactured choice, where the illusion of freedom is used to keep you obedient. It begins with how options are framed. Marketers don't just give you products, they frame your reality. Do you want the deluxe package or the premium package? Rarely are you asked whether you even need a package at all. In politics, you're told to choose between two parties, but both may serve the same underlying interests. In media, you're offered different perspectives, but all within a narrow ideological spectrum. The real radical options, true systemic alternatives, are invisible, excluded by design. So while you feel like you're choosing, you're actually selecting from a limited menu, pre-approved for your consumption. This is known as the false binary trick, and it's everywhere, but it's not always as blatant as politics or advertising. It also works on the level of identity. From birth, your choices are shaped by culture, religion, family, and media. What language you speak, how you define success, what kind of relationships you pursue. All of these choices are handed to you before you're even aware you're choosing. By the time you're old enough to think for yourself, your mind has already been furnished with the rules of the game. This isn't to say that choice doesn't exist at all. It does. But the context of your choices is almost always manufactured, and that's where control sneaks in. Even the desire to choose is often manipulated. Social media algorithms don't just reflect what you like, they shape what you think you like. The content you engage with begins to guide your preferences. Over time, you internalize this algorithmic conditioning and mistake it for your own personality. You think you love certain fashion trends, ideas, or lifestyles, but in reality, you were nudged there by a system designed to harvest your attention. And the more certain you feel about your choice, the more invisible the manipulation becomes. Nowhere is this paradox more devastating than in relationships and career paths. How many people choose partners based on subconscious conditioning, trauma, family dynamics, societal ideals, thinking it's love? How many pursue careers because they were told explicitly or implicitly that success looks a certain way? They choose law school, medicine, finance, not because they love it, but because it grants approval, status, stability. They follow the path because it was paved with praise, not passion. This creates a dangerous cycle. Once you've made the choice, you defend it. You tell yourself it was yours, you rationalize, you double down, and any discomfort that arises later, any unhappiness, restlessness, or regret, is treated not as a sign of manipulation, but as a personal failing. Why am I not fulfilled? I made this choice, didn't I? That internal conflict is the real trap. It keeps you stuck, blaming yourself, rather than questioning the structure that led you there. And society is structured to reinforce this illusion. Schools teach obedience disguised as education. Workplaces offer promotions that look like freedom, but come with deeper entrapment. Even therapy in some forms can become a way to adjust people to broken systems, rather than helping them escape them. You're trained to believe that the problem is within you, not the invisible architecture of choices you've been handed. So what does real choice even look like? It begins with the capacity to question the question, to pause before selecting from a menu and ask, who created these options? Why are these the only choices available? What am I not being shown? True freedom doesn't lie in picking between A and B. It lies in realizing that A and B are not the only possibilities. It also requires discomfort. Real choice often feels disorienting because it forces you to unlearn, to face the fact that parts of your life may have been shaped by forces you never saw. It's painful to realize your dream job isn't your dream, or that your type in relationships is rooted in childhood wounds. But that pain is the price of reclaiming your autonomy. And once you do, something incredible happens. You begin to create your own categories, your own definitions, your own desires. You stop asking, which option is best, and start asking, what do I actually want outside of what I've been taught to want? That is where choice begins, not in the answer, but in the refusal to accept the question as final. Because when the game is rigged, choosing your move isn't freedom. Refusing to play by their rules is. Next is a paradox, where dependence was mistaken for love. Attachment that imitated intimacy. Love is one of the most sought-after experiences in human life. We crave it, fight for it, chase it, and grieve it. In its truest form, love is expansive. It makes space for both connection and individuality. It deepens understanding and builds trust, allowing both people to grow in the presence of the other. But somewhere along the way, many of us confuse love with something else, something clingy, consuming, and emotionally charged. We call it love, but it's really something more fragile, more anxious, more reactive. This is the paradox: attachment that imitated intimacy. Attachment, at its root, is biological. We're wired to form bonds. As infants, our survival depends on connection. As adults, our nervous systems still seek out proximity, comfort, and reassurance. But when those needs become unbalanced, when fear overshadows trust, attachment stops being a bridge to intimacy and becomes a substitute for it. We mistake the presence of dependency for the presence of closeness. Think of the relationships where people can't be apart, not because they're in love, but because they're terrified of separation. They check in constantly, not out of a curiosity, but out of panic. They monitor tone, body language, texts. Silence becomes a threat. Disagreements feel like betrayal, And the worst fear isn't incompatibility, it's abandonment. To the outside world, this can look like passion. But look deeper and you'll see something else. A fear of being alone. A person whose entire sense of worth depends on another's validation. A relationship where boundaries dissolve, where compromise turns into self-erasure, where independence is replaced by emotional fusion. It feels intense, even romantic, but it's not intimacy. It's emotional survival. The paradox grows more dangerous over time, because when attachment pretends to be love, people will endure pain just to maintain the bond. They'll rationalize disrespect, tolerate manipulation, minimize emotional neglect. Anything is better than being alone. The absence of the other feels unbearable, not because the connection is so deep, but because the fear of disconnection is so overwhelming. This isn't just about romantic relationships. It shows up in friendships, families, even spiritual or professional communities. A person stays in a toxic group, not because they're thriving, but because the belonging, however conditional, feels safer than the unknown. They confuse the comfort of the familiar with the presence of love. But what they're really holding on to is attachment dressed up in intimacy's clothing. Social conditioning doesn't help. We're taught that true love is obsessive, that to miss someone constantly, to feel incomplete without them, to sacrifice endlessly, that's what love is. Movies, music, culture glorify this dependency. But real intimacy doesn't ask you to lose yourself. It asks you to bring your whole self. Ironically, true intimacy requires distance, not emotional detachment, but the kind of space where two people can be individuals, where differences are respected, not erased, where one person's growth doesn't threaten the other. But when you're operating from anxious attachment, space feels like danger, so you cling harder, even as the relationship weakens. You think closeness equals control, but the tighter the grip, the more intimacy dies. Why does this happen? Often, it begins in childhood. If your earliest relationships were unpredictable, conditional, or chaotic, you may equate love with tension. Calm feels foreign. You seek out relationships that echo that early instability, mistaking it for connection. You feel most alive when you're anxious, pursuing, proving. And even if your partner isn't hurting you, you'll still feel insecure, because it's not about them. It's about your internal blueprint. Breaking this paradox means rethinking what love actually is. Love isn't possession. It's not panic. It's not the constant need to be reassured. Love is curiosity, respect, presence. It's the ability to be alone and connected. It's found in the moments when two people see each other clearly, not just through the lens of fear or need. Start by asking yourself, am I in this relationship because I love the person, or because I'm afraid to be without them? Do I feel grounded when I'm with them, or just less anxious? These are not easy questions, but they are essential. Then, begin to develop secure connection with yourself. Learn to sit with your emotions without needing someone else to fix them. Build a life you love independently of another's presence. Strengthen your boundaries, not as walls, but as clarity. When you know who you are, you're less likely to lose yourself in someone else. Also, notice the difference between closeness and enmeshment. Closeness allows both people to breathe. Enmeshment suffocates. Closeness honors privacy. Enmeshment demands transparency. Closeness grows through mutual effort. Enmeshment thrives on unspoken rules and silent contracts. Choose closeness, question enmeshment. And finally, learn to tolerate healthy distance. Let others step away without spiraling. Let yourself need space without guilt. Because real intimacy isn't measured by how constantly connected you are, but by how safely you can disconnect and still feel secure. At its core, this paradox teaches us that not everything that feels like love is love, and sometimes the bravest act of love is letting go of what you thought it had to be. Next is a paradox where obedience didn't look like submission, but like virtue, obedience that looked like integrity. Obedience is usually seen as submission, a bending of the will, a quiet compliance, a loss of autonomy. We associate it with authoritarian systems, strict hierarchies, and repressive ideologies. But there's another, subtler form of obedience, one that hides beneath the mask of virtue, principle, and moral responsibility. This is the paradox, obedience that looked like integrity. In today's world, obedience doesn't always come with barking orders or marching boots. Sometimes it's dressed in the language of values. People obey, not because they're being forced, but because they believe they're doing the right thing. They follow rules, echo narratives, and uphold systems, not out of fear, but out of a deep conviction that this is what a good person does. This transformation begins with moral programming. From childhood, we're taught to be good, to listen, to respect authority, to follow the rules. Initially, this guidance helps socialize us, keeps us safe, builds communities, but over time, those same lessons can be weaponized. Institutions, governments, even corporations learn how to frame obedience as virtue. They convince you that compliance isn't weakness, it's ethics. And defiance? That's selfish, dangerous, immoral. The most powerful systems don't demand obedience, they inspire it. Take the workplace, for example. Employees are praised for being team players, for not rocking the boat, for staying loyal to company goals. They're told that questioning leadership is divisive, that going against the grain means you're not committed to the mission. So people suppress their concerns. They work unpaid overtime. They endure mistreatment, all in the name of being a professional. But underneath that professionalism is a quiet, obedient silence. Or look at nationalism. Citizens are told that supporting their country unconditionally is patriotic, that criticizing policies or leaders makes you ungrateful, disloyal, or even a traitor. So people bite their tongues, they wave the flag, they salute systems they privately doubt, because dissent has been reframed as moral failure. Even in social justice movements, this paradox can sneak in. There are moments when complex conversations get reduced to rigid scripts, where nuance is seen as betrayal, and questioning popular slogans is treated as heresy. People follow the right language, retweet the right takes, and perform the right values. Not always because they believe, but because they're afraid of being exiled. They obey in the name of justice, but it's still obedience. This is where the paradox becomes dangerous. Obedience fused with morality creates a self-policing individual. Someone who enforces the system, not because they're told to, but because They believe it's righteous, and that belief becomes unshakable. Any discomfort they feel is interpreted as growth. Any doubt is framed as weakness, and any rebel, a villain. You've likely seen this in everyday life. People who follow harmful policies because that's just the way it's done. Teachers enforcing flawed curricula. Doctors pushing bureaucratic decisions over patient needs. Law enforcers upholding unjust rules because that's the law. In each case, the individual may sleep soundly at night because they didn't act out of malice. They acted out of duty. But duty without questioning isn't integrity. It's programming. True integrity requires friction. It demands that you ask, do my actions align with what I believe is right, or just what I've been told is right? Am I upholding a principle, or just avoiding punishment? Would I make the same choice if there were no rewards or approval attached to it? That last question is key. Because in systems built on engineered obedience, virtue becomes transactional. People do the right thing to be seen, praised, promoted. Morality becomes a performance, not a compass. And that's how obedience spreads, not through force, but through praise. Consider whistleblowers. They're often labeled as disruptive, disloyal, unstable, but in truth, they're usually the most ethical people in the room. They're the ones who feel the weight of real integrity, the kind that defies groupthink, that pays a price. Their refusal to obey isn't a failure of character, it's the fullest expression of it. So how do we escape this paradox? First, we must stop equating obedience with goodness. Compliance is not a moral category. Sometimes the most ethical act is disobedience. Sometimes the truest form of loyalty is criticism. Integrity is not how well you follow rules. It's how deeply you reflect on them. Second, we must cultivate moral independence. Learn to pause when you're told what's right. Ask yourself, who benefits from me believing this? Is this principle universal, or is it being used selectively? Am I acting from clarity or from fear of judgment? Third, resist the pull of moral performance. It's easy to be seen as good by mimicking virtue, but real character is invisible. It happens in the small private choices, in the moments when no one's watching, when there's no applause, just you, your conscience, and a quiet decision. Because obedience dressed as virtue is still a cage, just one built from gold. It looks noble, it feels right, but it keeps you from thinking freely, from acting bravely, and the system that tells you to obey for the greater good often means the good of the system, not the good of your soul. Next is a paradox where security began to feel like captivity, safety that became a cage. Safety is one of the most basic human needs. We crave it like air. Safety means shelter, protection, predictability. It's the feeling of being held, guarded, insulated from harm. Whether it's physical safety, emotional safety, financial security, or social acceptance, we long for it because it allows us to rest. It's what lets us breathe fully, sleep peacefully, and take risks without fear of collapse. But safety has a shadow. Pursued too rigidly, protected too fiercely, it stops being a foundation and becomes a wall. This is the paradox. Safety that became a cage. Many of the systems and habits we build for safety are meant to offer relief from chaos. A job with steady pay. A relationship with routine. A belief system that answers uncertainty. These create order. But over time they can become so rigid, so sacred, that we begin to fear anything outside them. And that fear becomes a prison, not because someone else locked us in, but because we chose to shut the door ourselves. Consider the person who never leaves their hometown, not because they love it, but because the idea of the unknown feels too risky. Or the employee who hates their job but stays for the health insurance year after year until the job becomes their identity. Or the couple who no longer shares love, only mutual comfort, but fear being alone more than being unfulfilled. In each of these cases, safety becomes inertia, and inertia, over time, becomes a quiet form of suffocation. This paradox plays out not just in individuals, but in entire cultures. Societies build laws, norms, and surveillance systems to maintain order. And when those systems become too tight, they begin to sacrifice freedom for control. Citizens trade autonomy for security, privacy for protection. Dissent is silenced for the good of the people, and slowly, the society grows safe, but also sterile, numb, and afraid of its own shadow. Parents, too, fall into this paradox. In an effort to protect their children from every possible harm, they eliminate all risk. No climbing, no failing, no danger. But in doing so, they rob their children of resilience. Without struggle, there's no strength. Without danger, there's no courage. The safest child may also be the most unprepared for the world. Even our internal worlds reflect this dilemma. Emotional safety is critical for healing, yes. But when we build emotional armor so thick that no one can touch us, we're not safe. We're alone. We mistake numbness for peace. We confuse detachment for maturity. But what we've really done is built a bunker and called it home. Why does this happen? Because safety is addictive. It feels good until it starts feeling necessary. We begin to believe we can't survive discomfort, that any risk equals danger, that any change equals threat. And once fear takes root, it grows roots deep into every part of our lives. We stop trying, we stop exploring, we stop asking, and we call it wisdom. But deep down we know we're not wise, we're afraid. And this is the most painful part of the paradox. The very thing meant to protect us ends up limiting us. The fortress becomes a tomb. So how do we escape? We start by redefining safety. Real safety isn't the absence of risk, it's the presence of resilience. It's not about building walls to keep life out. It's about building strength to face life when it arrives. True safety isn't about control, it's about capacity. We must also examine the systems we've built around us. Ask, am I here because it feels safe, or because I'm afraid to leave? Am I staying because I love this, or because I'm afraid of what comes next? These questions are uncomfortable. They shake the foundations, but they also unlock the door. Next, we must learn to embrace productive discomfort. That means stepping outside the known, not recklessly, but intentionally. Having hard conversations, taking small risks, letting go of something familiar. Every act of courage is a crack in the cage, and through those cracks, life begins to breathe again. It's also vital to remember that growth and safety are not enemies, but they are often in tension. The best kind of safety is the kind that moves with you, not holds you still. A relationship where you can change. A job where you can speak up. A belief system that welcomes doubt. These are flexible safeties, the kind that bend so you don't have to break. And lastly, practice self-trust. Many of us cling to safety because we don't trust ourselves to survive risk. But the truth is, you are stronger than you think. You have fallen before. You have risen before. You will do it again. Safety isn't found by hiding from the world. It's found by walking into it, with your eyes open and your heart intact. Because sometimes the safest place to be is not behind a wall, but inside your own courage. Next is a paradox where sacrifice wasn't selfless, it was self-erasure. Sacrifice that erased the self. Sacrifice is often held up as the highest form of love, loyalty, or virtue. We celebrate those who give everything for their families, for their causes, for their beliefs. The parent who works 3 jobs to support their children. The activist who puts their body on the line for justice. The partner who gives endlessly in the name of love. We're taught that to sacrifice is to be noble, that giving up your needs for others is a mark of strength. But what happens when the line between devotion and disappearance gets crossed? What happens when sacrifice becomes so total that the self vanishes? This is the paradox. Sacrifice that erases the self. The danger with sacrifice is that it's deeply tied to identity. People begin to see themselves as the giver, the protector, the caretaker. Their value becomes tied to how much they're willing to endure, how little they demand, how invisible they can make their own needs. Over time, their sense of self is not just shaped by sacrifice, it's defined by it. And slowly, they stop existing as a full person. They become a role, a function, a service. This is particularly common in caregiving relationships. A parent may pour everything into their child, time, energy, money, emotional labor, until they no longer know who they are outside of parenthood. Their hobbies vanish, their friendships fade, their dreams are placed on an indefinite shelf. And when the child grows up and becomes independent, the parent is left with a terrifying question. What now? Who am I if I'm not needed? The same happens in romantic partnerships. One partner may sacrifice their career, their desires, or even their beliefs to keep the relationship alive. They convince themselves it's love. That love means compromise. That love means putting the other person first. But eventually they find themselves shrinking, saying less, wanting less, becoming smaller to maintain peace. And over time, they no longer feel loved. They feel invisible. In many cultures, especially patriarchal or collectivist ones, this kind of self-erasing sacrifice is glorified. People, often women, are praised for being selfless, for never complaining, for always giving. They're told that this is what makes them worthy, that their pain is proof of their goodness, that their silence is strength. But beneath this, celebration is a quiet tragedy, the disappearance of a human being. The paradox intensifies because those who live in this kind of sacrifice often don't know they're disappearing. They tell themselves it's just a phase, that they'll get to their needs eventually, that they're doing what's right, and the praise they receive from others only reinforces the behavior. You're so strong. You're such an angel. I don't know how you do it. The world rewards their erasure, and they learn to confuse sacrifice with purpose. But the consequences are real. Long-term self-erasure leads to depression, resentment, burnout, and a quiet bitterness that eats away at the soul. The person may one day explode with anger or retreat entirely from the people they once loved. Or worse, they may never act out at all. Just quietly live a life of numb compliance, smiling on the outside while feeling dead within. This paradox is further complicated by the fact that true giving requires a self. You cannot give fully if there's nothing left of you. You cannot love well if you're running on empty. A burnt-out caregiver doesn't give care, they give fragments. A silenced partner doesn't bring peace, they bring absence. What looks like generosity can become a kind of ghosting, a person who's physically present, emotionally absent, spiritually hollow. So how do we break free from this paradox? First, by dismantling the belief that sacrifice is always noble. Not all giving is good. Not all silence is strength. Not all suffering is sacred. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is set a boundary. Sometimes, the most generous act is telling someone no, because in protecting your wholeness, you protect the integrity of what you give. Second, redefine love, not as disappearance, but as mutual presence. Healthy relationships don't require you to disappear. They require you to show up fully, to speak your needs, to be seen. And in doing so, you give others permission to do the same. You teach them that love doesn't mean martyrdom, it means reciprocity. Third, reconnect with the self. Ask, what do I want outside of what others need from me? What brings me joy, not just usefulness? What part of me have I buried in the name of being good? Because the self you silence will one day rebel. It may whisper in the night or scream in crisis, but it will not stay gone forever. And that's the core truth behind this paradox. A life built entirely on sacrifice will one day collapse under the weight of absence. You deserve more than to be someone else's pillar. You deserve to be whole. Next is a paradox where your agreement wasn't fully yours. Agreement that was engineered. Agreement is often seen as harmony. When people agree, whether in conversation, in relationships, in social systems, it signals alignment, understanding, even peace. We praise consensus. We equate agreement with intelligence and cooperation. But what if agreement isn't always the product of shared understanding? What if, instead, it's something engineered, nudged, or even coerced without you ever realizing it? This is the paradox, agreement that was engineered. In many cases, what we call agreement is actually the result of manipulated perception. You don't arrive at a conclusion through critical thinking. You're guided there, subtly, through framing, repetition, emotional pressure, and social conformity. By the time you say, "Yes, I agree," it feels like your idea, but the path that led you there was carefully constructed. You didn't walk freely, you were funneled. Take the phenomenon of priming. In psychology, priming refers to how subtle cues influence your responses. For example, if someone shows you the word old and then asks you to complete the word wrinkle, you're more likely to associate it with age. Similarly, in conversation, the way a question is asked dramatically affects your answer. Don't you think this option is safer? Is not a neutral question, it's a guided suggestion. And yet, when you nod in agreement, you believe it was your judgment. That's engineered agreement. Advertising and politics rely on this constantly. A product is shown with happy, attractive people. A political idea is wrapped in patriotic imagery. A news story is framed to highlight certain facts while omitting others. Over time, you agree. not because you independently examined the truth, but because the environment around the idea shaped your emotional reaction. You don't just believe what's true, you believe what feels safe, familiar, or socially validated. Nowhere is this more visible than in group dynamics. Social psychologist Solomon Asch demonstrated that people will conform to incorrect group opinions, even when the truth is obvious. In his famous experiments, participants agreed with clearly wrong answers just to avoid standing out. The pressure to align, to keep the peace, to not seem difficult, it overrides personal logic. You agree, not because you're convinced, but because you're afraid of disagreeing. This kind of engineered agreement happens in relationships too. A partner may use guilt, silence, or subtle disapproval to guide your choices. You learn what's okay to say, what's safe to want. You start agreeing to avoid conflict, to earn love, to preserve harmony. But underneath that agreement is self-abandonment. And the longer it continues, the more you forget what your real opinion even was. In workplaces, engineered agreement appears through hierarchy. A junior employee might nod along in a meeting, not because they agree, but because challenging the boss would be risky. Over time, this breeds cultures where no one speaks up, everyone agrees, and innovation dies. But the surface looks peaceful, because everyone's on the same page. The danger of this paradox is that it feels good. Agreement feels like connection. It feels like belonging. When you align with a group or a leader or a partner, you feel validated. You avoid friction, you gain approval, but the cost is high. Authenticity. You lose the ability to think out loud, to explore doubt, to change your mind. You become a mirror, not a mind. And the system loves this. Engineered agreement creates smooth, obedient societies. Marketing works better. Policies pass easier. Workflows run faster. But at what cost? When people stop expressing dissent, the system stops evolving. It becomes an echo chamber, comfortable but stagnant, quiet but blind. So how can you tell if your agreement is real or engineered? Start by asking yourself, did I arrive at this conclusion on my own? Was I exposed to multiple perspectives or just one? Do I feel free to disagree? And what would happen if I did? Real agreement involves choice, not just compliance. It welcomes friction. It survives doubt. If your agreement feels like a requirement, it's probably been engineered. You can also spot engineered agreement by watching for emotional manipulation. Were you guilted into agreeing? Flattered into it? Shamed? Did someone appeal to your fear of exclusion or failure? If yes, then your agreement was just a survival response. Another sign, when changing your mind feels dangerous. If you feel locked into a belief or decision because backing out would make you look weak, disloyal, or wrong, that's a trap. That's engineered consent hiding as commitment. Escaping this paradox doesn't mean becoming disagreeable. It means becoming aware. It means reclaiming your pause, saying, I'm not sure yet. I need more time. Let me think about that. It means separating your desire to connect from your right to question. Because true connection doesn't require agreement, it requires honesty. Real agreement comes with freedom. Engineered agreement comes with fear. And once you learn to tell the difference, you stop being manipulated. You start being conscious. Next is a paradox where convenience turned into quiet dependence. Convenience that created dependency. We live in a world built for convenience, instant delivery, one-click shopping, smart assistants, meal kits, auto-suggestions, navigation apps, reminders, automation. Everything around us is designed to remove friction. The promise is clear. Convenience saves time, energy, and mental effort. Why struggle when you don't have to? Why wait when you can have it now? And for a while, it feels like a dream. But over time, a strange thing begins to happen. The more convenient life becomes, the more helpless we feel without it. The easier things get, the harder it becomes to function without assistance. This is the paradox. Convenience that created dependency. Convenience, by definition, removes challenge. It strips away the need to remember, to plan, to endure, to adapt. That seems like a win, until you realize those are the exact muscles you need to build independence. When those muscles go unused, they atrophy. You begin to outsource not just tasks, but capabilities. You don't just avoid effort, you lose the ability to make effort meaningful. Take something simple, navigation. GPS apps guide us flawlessly, from point A to B. No need to know the streets, the landmarks, or even the direction you're facing. But remove the app and we're lost, literally. A few generations ago, people used internal maps, memory, and directional reasoning. Now even a brief signal drop can send a modern traveler into panic. We haven't just gained ease, we've lost orientation. Consider communication. With autocorrect predictive text and AI chat tools, we no longer need to spell, craft, or sometimes even think in full sentences. But the downside is subtle. We become lazy thinkers, less precise with our words, less articulate when the tech isn't around to fill in the blanks. Our internal language skills shrink, while our dependence on external correction grows. This applies even to memory. We no longer need to remember birthdays, phone numbers, directions, recipes, or even appointments. It's all stored somewhere. Our calendars, devices, or cloud backups. But with each thing we offload, we reinforce a message. You don't need to remember, just rely on the system. And that message, repeated daily, quietly erodes mental resilience. Convenience also affects physical dependency. Elevators, escalators, food delivery, smart appliances, voice-activated devices. Everything is done for us. We move less, exert less, do less, and our bodies respond accordingly. We grow weaker, stiffer, less coordinated. The tools designed to help us function begin to replace the very functions they were meant to assist. But this isn't just about skills or strength, it's about mindset. The more we're surrounded by ease, the more allergic we become to difficulty. We begin to expect instant gratification in every area: love, career, self-improvement, even healing. We lose tolerance for discomfort. And when things don't come easily, we give up faster. We blame the system, or we wait for a shortcut. Over time, we start to believe that if something is hard, it must be wrong. This creates a feedback loop. The more convenience we consume, the more incapable we feel without it. The more incapable we feel, the more we seek convenience. And slowly, we become dependent, not just on tools, but on the feeling of effortlessness itself. The irony is painful. The tools designed to empower us end up weakening us. The systems meant to save us time end up consuming our ability to function independently. We gain comfort, but lose self-reliance. So how do we break free from this paradox? We don't need to reject convenience. That would be extreme and unrealistic. But we do need to reintroduce effort. We need to build micro-resistance into our daily lives. Walk when it's easier to drive. Memorize one number a week. Cook instead of ordering out. Write without autocorrect. Navigate without GPS just once, even if you make a few wrong turns. These small acts won't radically change your life overnight, but they'll begin to reignite dormant abilities. More importantly, they'll remind you that challenge isn't something to avoid, it's something to train for. Because autonomy is like a muscle. Use it or lose it. Another step is to stop confusing efficiency with effectiveness. Just because something is fast doesn't mean it's better. Just because it's easier doesn't mean it's healthier. The convenience culture has sold us the illusion that the shortest path is always the best. But in reality, growth often lives in the longer, harder routes. We also need to question the systems around us. Ask, who benefits from my dependence? What abilities have I outsourced and why? What would happen if the system failed? Would I collapse with it? These are not paranoid questions. They're preparatory ones. Because systems do fail, tech does crash. And when they do, the people who've preserved their basic skills, their mental maps, their capacity for discomfort, they survive, they adapt, they lead. That's the final truth of this paradox. Convenience is a gift when used wisely, but dependency is the price we pay when we let convenience replace capability. Next is a paradox where awareness led not to freedom but paralysis. Awareness that froze us in place. Awareness is often hailed as the first step to freedom. Know thyself, the ancient aphorism urges. Self-awareness promises transformation. Emotional awareness promises healing. Social and political awareness promise progress. We're taught that seeing clearly is the antidote to confusion, illusion, suffering, and yet countless people today find themselves more aware than ever of their patterns, their traumas, their privileges, their place in the world, and still deeply stuck. Stuck in anxiety, indecision, overthinking, trapped in observation, unable to act. This is the paradox. Awareness that froze us in place. In the age of hyperinformation, we are flooded with insights. Therapy speak is mainstream. Trauma, narcissism, codependency, these terms circulate daily. We understand attachment styles, nervous system regulation, internal family systems. We know how our childhood shaped us, what our coping mechanisms are, how our brains respond to stress. This is good, even necessary. But sometimes, knowledge becomes excessive self-monitoring. Instead of freeing us, awareness becomes a spotlight we can't turn off. A constant watcher that makes every thought feel suspect and every emotion a puzzle to solve. Take someone struggling with anxiety. They learn how it forms. They understand their triggers. They recognize their thought spirals. But when the panic hits, they're not comforted by the knowledge. Instead, they spiral further, now aware that they're spiraling. A meta-anxiety kicks in. I know why this is happening, so why can't I stop it? Awareness becomes a weapon, turned inward. This paradox shows up in moral and social realms too. A person becomes aware of systemic injustice. They learn about privilege, power, complicity. They want to help, to be better. But now every action feels potentially harmful. They don't speak for fear of saying the wrong thing. They don't act for fear of causing unintended damage. Their empathy becomes so sharp, so sensitized, that it paralyzes them. They're no longer ignorant, but they're also no longer effective. They're caught in a loop of over-awareness and under-action. In Tao, relationships, hyper-awareness of one's patterns can lead to overcorrection. You spot your avoidant tendencies, so you overcompensate with forced vulnerability. You notice your people-pleasing, so you become overly rigid with boundaries. You name every dynamic, every shift in tone, every micro-trigger, but in doing so, you lose the fluidity of connection. The relationship becomes a diagnostic lab, not a living experience. At its worst, awareness becomes identity. We say, I'm just anxious, I'm traumatized, I'm neurodivergent, I'm emotionally unavailable. These labels, meant to provide understanding, become cages. We stop exploring and start accepting limitation as destiny. We resign ourselves to patterns because we now understand them. Instead of asking, how do I grow from this? We say, this is just who I am. What's most haunting is how awareness can create a false sense of progress. You feel like you've changed because you see things more clearly, but insight is not integration. You can know everything about your wounds and still live inside them. You can explain your dysfunctions in perfect language and still be ruled by them. Growth doesn't happen in the mind. It happens in the body, in behavior, in risk. So how do we navigate this paradox? First, we must remember that awareness is a doorway, not a destination. It is the beginning of the work, not the work itself. Knowing your patterns isn't enough. You must practice interrupting them. Understanding your triggers isn't enough. You must build tolerance for them. Insight must be followed by embodiment. Second, we must release the illusion of perfect clarity. Many of us delay action because we want to be sure of our motives, our impact, our healing. But clarity is often a byproduct of movement, not a prerequisite. Sometimes you must act while uncertain. Sometimes you must speak while imperfect. Waiting to be fully ready often means never beginning. Third, practice non-attached observation. Not every thought needs dissection. Not every emotion needs explanation. Sometimes the most powerful awareness is quiet witnessing, allowing the storm to pass without trying to label every cloud. Awareness doesn't always mean doing something. Sometimes it means letting things be. Fourth, be cautious with labels. Use them as maps, not prisons. Let your diagnoses guide your understanding, not define your limits. Remember that every term, every theory, every framework is a tool, and tools are meant to be used, not lived inside. Finally, return to the body. Awareness often gets trapped in the mind, looping, analyzing, scanning. But transformation requires grounding. Breathe, move, rest, cry, dance, build, speak. Your body knows things your mind hasn't caught up to, and often the shift happens there first, in sensation, not in language. The core of this paradox is this: awareness without action is inertia. Awareness without compassion is cruelty. Awareness without grounding is disembodiment. You were not meant to spend your life analyzing yourself. You were meant to live. Next, trust that made you obedient. Trust is a cornerstone of every healthy relationship. Personal, professional, societal. It creates stability, promotes cooperation, and makes complex systems function smoothly. We're taught that trust is something noble, something that binds people and communities together. But what happens when trust isn't earned? It's designed. What happens when the very act of trusting becomes a tool of control, not freedom? This is the paradox. Trust, when manipulated, doesn't empower. It neutralizes resistance. It doesn't liberate. It compels obedience. In most settings, trust begins with consistency. A leader who speaks calmly, shows up predictably, and uses familiar language is perceived as reliable. Over time, this consistency becomes comfort. Comfort becomes trust. And trust becomes compliance. Not because you've examined every word or verified every action, but because you've learned to associate that person or institution with stability. And once that emotional bond is formed, skepticism dies quietly. In this way, trust isn't always a result of truth. It's often a product of repetition. This psychological trick is used everywhere, from marketing to politics to religious authority. Corporations invest billions into branding, not just to sell a product, but to build trust. The more familiar the logo, the more likely you are to assume the company is safe. Politicians use certain tones, slogans, and symbols repeatedly to establish trust, even if their actions contradict their words. The subconscious mind begins to associate style with substance, and once trust is installed, obedience follows. But trust doesn't just control from the outside. It rewires your internal compass. When you deeply trust someone, your guard drops. You outsource decision-making. You stop questioning. You assume they know better. You might say, "They'd never lie to me," or "They always have our best interest at heart." That's not rational analysis. That's psychological allegiance. And it's fertile ground for manipulation. In cults, this paradox is weaponized to extreme degrees. Leaders present themselves as humble, enlightened, or spiritually superior. Followers, over time, stop thinking for themselves. They believe questioning the leader is the same as questioning truth or God. In these environments, obedience becomes a moral duty, not a choice. But the structure that allows this to happen is the same. Engineered trust leads to unconscious obedience. Even in everyday life, this pattern quietly governs behavior. In relationships, for example, you might trust a partner who consistently tells you they love you, even as they ignore your boundaries or dismiss your pain. That trust becomes a shield they hide behind. You keep forgiving. You stop confronting. You obey the dynamic, not because it feels right, but because trust has blinded your instincts. This isn't to say trust is bad, but when trust is unexamined, it becomes dangerous. When it's based on emotional familiarity rather than earned integrity, it makes you vulnerable to exploitation. And the scariest part? You may never realize it's happening, because the more obedient you become, the more convinced you are that you're acting freely. The paradox deepens when we realize that systems reward those who trust without question. Employees who challenge their managers are labeled difficult. Citizens who question national narratives are called disloyal. Children who challenge authority are punished for talking back. In every layer of society, obedience is incentivized. And trust is the lubricant that makes it feel natural. Think of how often we're told, just trust the process, trust the system. trust the science. These phrases can be empowering when they come from places of mutual respect and evidence. But when they are used to silence doubt, they become red flags. They imply that questioning is irrational or even dangerous. And that's the moment trust ceases to be a tool for connection and becomes a mechanism for control. Another layer of this paradox is guilt. Once you've deeply trusted someone or something, it becomes emotionally costly to admit you were wrong. You don't just question them, you question yourself, your intelligence, your judgment. And so, rather than confront the betrayal, you double down. You obey more. You trust harder. You rationalize red flags. In this way, trust creates a self-reinforcing trap. The more you invest, the harder it becomes to leave, even when the truth is obvious. To escape this paradox, you don't have to become cynical or paranoid. You have to become aware. Understand that trust is not a virtue in itself. It's a dynamic, a tool. It must be monitored, re-evaluated, and sometimes revoked. Healthy trust is flexible, not blind. It allows space for doubt, disagreement, and redefinition. It doesn't demand obedience. It invites collaboration. Start asking, why do I trust this person or system? What have they actually done to earn it? And do I still feel free to walk away if things change? Because real trust doesn't require surrender. It doesn't fear questioning. It thrives in the presence of critical thought. Anything that punishes your skepticism was never trust. It was just a trap. Next is a paradox where resistance became a form of submission, rebellion that reinforced the system. Rebellion is supposed to be liberating. It's the fire that burns through oppression, the refusal to conform, the cry of the individual against the machine. From revolutions to protest art, from counterculture movements to personal defiance, rebellion has long been romanticized as a force of progress. It challenges norms, breaks chains, and reclaims power. But here's the twist. Sometimes rebellion doesn't break the system. It feeds it. Sometimes what looks like resistance is just another cog turning in the same machine. This is the paradox. Rebellion that reinforced the system. We imagine rebels as revolutionaries, but systems are smart. They learn how to absorb rebellion and market it back to us. They turn protest into profit. A counterculture style becomes a fashion line. A radical book becomes a bestseller. A rebellious message becomes a hashtag. The system doesn't always fight rebellion. It co-opts it. It says, yes, be different. Just do it in a way that we can package, sell, and track. And suddenly, rebellion becomes part of the very thing it was meant to oppose. Take youth culture, for example. Generations have used clothing, music, slang, and behavior to resist authority. Punk, goth, grunge, hip-hop all began as raw expressions of discontent. But the market watches closely. Soon, the look is mass-produced, the sound is auto-tuned, the message is sanitized. What once shocked becomes trendy. What once meant freedom now signals belonging to a new tribe, with its own rules and expectations. Rebellion, instead of freeing the individual, simply shifts them from one uniform to another. Even political and ideological rebellion isn't safe from this loop. Movements that start as genuine resistance often calcify into dogmas. A protest becomes an institution. A revolution installs a new kind of oppression. What began as a fight for truth becomes a demand for loyalty. The slogans change, but the power structures remain. You can see this in history again and again. Those who once opposed the system rise to power, only to recreate the very dynamics they claim to reject. On a personal level, the same paradox plays out. A teenager rebels against strict parents by adopting a rebellious identity. But soon they're trapped in that role, expected to always be defiant, always edgy. A person leaves a rigid job to start their own business, only to become a harsher boss to themselves. Someone escapes an abusive relationship, but ends up repeating the same patterns in a new one. The form changes, but the pattern repeats. Rebellion can even be an illusion. Consider online outrage culture. People rail against the system, call out injustice, cancel celebrities, all in the name of resistance. But these actions often happen in environments designed to profit from engagement. The algorithm amplifies controversy. The system loves rebellion because it keeps people online, enraged and scrolling. Your defiance is fuel. Your anger is currency. You feel powerful, but you're actually participating in a loop that benefits the very powers you oppose. Even in language, rebellion is absorbed. Words like disrupt, revolution, and authenticity are now corporate buzzwords. Companies tell you to be yourself, stand out, challenge the norm, as long as you keep buying. The message of rebellion becomes a marketing strategy. You're not resisting the system. You're expressing your individuality within it in ways the system designed and approved. So how do we avoid this trap? The first step is awareness. Rebellion isn't just about what you're opposing, it's about how and why. Ask, is my rebellion creating new freedom or just shifting the mask? Am I choosing this path or reacting to something? If your identity depends on being the opposite of something, you're still defined by it. Second, practice quiet rebellion. Not every act of resistance needs to be loud. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is turn inward. Heal your wounds. Refuse to pass down generational pain. Choose rest over productivity. Choose presence over performance. These rebellions don't get headlines, but they change lives. Third, rebel by building, not just destroying. It's easy to criticize, to mock, to dismantle. It's harder to imagine and create. True rebellion isn't just opposition, it's vision. Don't just rage against the system. Ask, what would I build instead? What kind of world am I trying to create? Destruction is satisfying, but creation is transformational. Fourth, be wary of becoming what you hate. Anger is a powerful fuel, but it burns quickly. Without reflection, you risk replicating the same power structures you were fighting. Stay humble. Stay questioning. Remember that rebellion without introspection easily becomes repetition. And finally, remember that freedom isn't just about escaping systems. It's about escaping patterns inside and out. Sometimes rebellion looks like stillness, like listening, like walking away, like no longer needing to prove anything. Because the deepest rebellion is not the one that screams the loudest, but the one that refuses to be defined by what it resists. Next comes a paradox where truth itself becomes a weapon of silence. Truth that silenced dissent. Truth is often treated as sacred. It's the foundation of justice, the heart of science, the promise of transparency. We're taught that truth is the antidote to manipulation, that if people just knew the facts, they'd make the right decisions, break free from control, and move toward progress. But what if the opposite is also true? What if, under certain conditions, truth doesn't liberate, it imprisons? What if the insistence on truth becomes a mechanism to shut down dissent, enforce obedience, and invalidate personal experience? This is the paradox, truth that silences dissent. The first step toward this paradox is authority's ability to claim ownership of truth. Governments, media outlets, institutions, and even ideologies often declare themselves as guardians of the truth. Once this status is achieved, any challenge to their narrative can be framed not as debate, but as denial, stupidity, or even danger. Dissenters aren't seen as people with different perspectives. They're labeled as misinformed, irrational, or enemies of the truth. In this dynamic, truth is no longer a path toward understanding. It's a shield, a weapon, a way to dismiss opposition without engaging with it. Think about how this plays out in political discourse. One party claims scientific consensus, journalistic credibility, or moral high ground. They insist, this is the truth, the debate is over. Anyone who questions, hesitates, or suggests nuance is accused of being anti-science, a conspiracy, theorist, or simply uneducated. Even when the dissenter isn't wrong, even when they raise real concerns, the truth is used to silence, not to explain. This is how authoritarianism hides in plain sight, not by banning speech outright, but by monopolizing truth, by creating a culture where questioning becomes taboo, not because the question is invalid, but because the answer has already been decided. But the paradox doesn't end with external censorship. It also gets inside the mind. When someone is told over and over again that the truth is settled, they begin to doubt their own thoughts. They feel hesitation before asking questions. They silence themselves before they even speak. Over time, this internal censorship becomes second nature. The mind becomes a courtroom where only pre-approved truths are allowed to testify. Everything else is dismissed as noise. This is especially destructive in areas like trauma, race, gender, or social justice, where personal experiences often contradict the dominant narrative. A person might say, "I feel unsafe, I've been silenced," or "This system doesn't serve me." And if their truth doesn't align with the statistical, institutional, or publicly accepted version of reality, they're gaslit. That's not really happening. You're just being emotional. The data says otherwise. In this way, lived experience is erased in favor of empirical truth. But truth without empathy isn't enlightenment. It's tyranny wearing a lab coat. Another layer of this paradox is how truth becomes a performance. In the age of social media, people weaponize truth bombs to win arguments, not to foster understanding. Facts are cherry-picked to shame others. Studies are quoted to shut people up. "I have the truth" becomes a badge of moral superiority. But truth, when wielded with arrogance, becomes indistinguishable from propaganda. Even in science and academia, truth can become dogmatic. Peer-reviewed journals, research institutions, and thought leaders all operate within paradigms, mental models that define what kinds of questions are acceptable. Challenging these paradigms often leads to professional isolation. Even when the challenge is backed by evidence, it's seen as heretical. The history of science is filled with thinkers who were dismissed, punished, or silenced, not because they were wrong, but because their version of truth didn't fit the narrative. And still, we cling to the illusion that truth equals freedom. So, how do we escape this paradox? First, we must separate truth from authority. Just because someone has power, credentials, or a platform doesn't mean they possess objective truth. And just because someone is marginalized, uncertain, or emotional doesn't mean they're wrong. Second, we must embrace the idea that truth is not a destination. It's a process. It evolves. It contradicts itself. It changes with new information. Any person or institution that claims to have all the truth, all the time, is more interested in control than clarity. Third, we must create space for dissent, even when it's messy. Real freedom of thought requires discomfort. It means tolerating voices we dislike, engaging with ideas we don't fully understand, and resisting the urge to simplify complex realities into binary categories of true or false. Finally, we must stop using truth as a weapon to win and start using it as a tool to understand. That means asking better questions, listening longer, and remembering that behind every fact is a human being, flawed, scared, hopeful, and trying to make sense of the world just like you. Because in the end, the truth should never be a wall. It should be a window. And if it's being used to shut you up instead of open you up, then what you're hearing may not be truth at all. Next is a paradox where progress trapped us in acceleration. Progress that made us chase without rest. Progress is the great anthem of modern civilization. It promises better lives, better tools, better systems, better selves. It tells us that with each innovation, we move closer to fulfillment, that every step forward is a step toward freedom. From technology to medicine to education to economics, we are taught to strive, to push, optimize, improve. But beneath the surface of this relentless upward climb lies a strange kind of exhaustion. The more we progress, the less we seem to pause. The faster we move, the more we feel we're falling behind. This is the paradox. Progress that made us chase without rest. In theory, progress should create space. With automation, we should have more leisure. With knowledge, we should have more clarity. With tools, we should have more ease. But in reality, progress often multiplies expectations. As soon as we meet one goal, another appears. As soon as one task is simplified, 10 more fill its place. Efficiency doesn't reduce the load, it raises the bar. You answer emails faster, so now you're expected to reply instantly. You work remotely, so now you're always reachable. You learn a new skill, so now you must learn the next. Every improvement shifts the baseline. Yesterday's miracle is today's minimum. In this way, progress becomes a treadmill. You move, but never arrive. You achieve, but never rest. And the very tools that were meant to liberate you begin to enslave your attention. Consider the smartphone. It puts the world in your pocket, a marvel of progress. But it also ensures you're never fully present, never fully offline, never fully still. The faster you connect, the more you're expected to respond. The more apps you use, the more alerts demand your attention. You're plugged in, but drained. Empowered, but fragmented. This pattern extends into personal development. The self-help world tells you to always be healing, always be optimizing. Every moment must be productive. Rest must be earned. Stillness becomes laziness. The pressure to become your best self never ends. Because the idea of the best self keeps changing. You become a lifelong project with no completion. Date. Even wellness has been industrialized. Meditation apps, sleep trackers, biohacks, gratitude journals, all meant to help you slow down. Yet they arrive in notifications, streaks, and performance metrics. The pursuit of peace becomes another task. You try to relax and feel behind on relaxing. What's most unsettling about this paradox is how invisible it is. You don't feel forced. No one's holding a whip. But the culture whispers, go faster, do more, stay ahead. And because everyone else is running too, it feels normal. But normal isn't the same as healthy. Over time, the chase wears you down. You begin to feel tired, not just physically, but existentially. You wake up exhausted, not from labor, but from pressure. You lie in bed, not because you're resting, but because you can't keep up. Life becomes a blur of motion with no meaning. The progress promised fulfillment. But instead, you feel hollowed out. This paradox also has societal consequences. Economies that prize endless growth begin to devour the resources that sustain them. Forests fall for faster production. Oceans empty for more convenience. Climate collapses under the weight of acceleration. The planet, like its people, is being pushed past its limits, all in the name of progress. So how do we break this cycle? First, redefine progress. Stop measuring it solely by speed, output, or innovation. Ask instead, does this change increase our capacity for rest, connection, wisdom, and joy? If not, it may not be progress. It may just be motion. Second, reclaim your pace. Not everything has to be faster. Not every day needs to be optimized. Start honoring slowness. Take walks without a destination. Write without an audience. Be bored. Be still. These are not signs of laziness. They are acts of resistance. Third, protect your boundaries. Progress often seduces us into always being on. But the off switch is sacred. Set hard lines around your time, your attention, your inner world. You are not a machine. You do not exist to be efficient. You exist to be whole. Lastly, remember, progress without pause is just acceleration. And acceleration without direction is chaos. The point of progress is not to move constantly, it's to move meaningfully. There's an ancient wisdom in this. The tree does not grow faster by stretching its branches. It grows deeper by sinking its roots. And sometimes, the most powerful form of progress is the decision to stop, breathe, and be. Next comes a paradox where freedom itself becomes a form of control. Freedom that enforced control. Freedom is humanity's most cherished ideal. The right to speak, to choose, to move, to believe. These are the pillars of modern civilization. We fight wars in its name. We construct laws to protect it. We raise children to believe that freedom is the ultimate good, the highest goal. But what if the very concept of freedom is being used to control us? What if the idea that you are free is precisely what keeps you from realizing you're not? This is the paradox. Freedom that enforces control, it begins with language. From the moment we're old enough to understand the world, we're told that we live in a free society, that we can be whoever we want to be, that we are masters of our own destiny. But freedom in this context is often abstract. It's not a lived experience, it's a belief. And belief, when unchecked, becomes one of the strongest forms of psychological control. Because if you believe you're free, then you won't question the forces shaping your behavior. You won't notice the algorithms guiding your preferences, the social scripts governing your identity, the economic pressures that narrow your choices. You'll call it just life. You'll call it normal. You'll blame yourself for not thriving inside a system that was never built to liberate you. This is how freedom becomes a leash, not a chain, not a prison. A leash, long enough to make you feel autonomous, short enough to keep you from escaping. Take capitalism, for example. You're told that you're free to choose any path, build any business, follow any dream. But, in reality, your freedom is constrained by class, by debt, by lack of access. You're free to starve if you don't comply. You're free to fail without a safety net. And when you inevitably struggle, you don't challenge the system, you blame yourself. After all, you were free, weren't you? Or consider social media. These platforms are marketed as spaces of expression. You can post what you want, follow who you want, consume what you want. But behind the scenes, every move you make is monitored, monetized, and manipulated. You're given the illusion of boundless choice, while your behavior is nudged, your attention harvested, your identity shaped. And yet, you still feel free, because no one's stopping you, because the cage is invisible. Even in education, the same paradox thrives. You're told to think critically, but you're graded on conformity. You're told to be yourself, but punished if your individuality disrupts the curriculum. The structure insists that you're free to learn anything, but the content, the pace, the authority are all predefined. Real freedom, freedom to question the system itself, is off limits. And once again, you internalize the failure. You weren't focused. You weren't smart enough. You didn't try hard enough. But what if you were never truly free to begin with? One of the most dangerous effects of this paradox is its self-policing mechanism. When people believe they are free, they start to take pride in their compliance. They call it discipline, responsibility, maturity. They ridicule those who resist. They shame those who question. In this way, freedom becomes a tool of conformity. You obey not because you're forced, but because you're convinced it's what a free person should do. This is why so many systems don't need overt surveillance anymore. The control is internalized. The boundaries are mental. The punishment is self-imposed. And the more someone tries to break free from this illusion, the more society turns on them. A person who opts out of conventional success is seen as lazy. Someone who questions nationalism is seen as a traitor. Someone who refuses to play the social media game is seen as irrelevant. These aren't just opinions, they're forms of social control disguised as cultural norms. But how do you break out of a trap that's disguised as liberty? First, you have to let go of the comforting illusion. Realize that feeling free is not the same as being free. Ask, who benefits from me believing I'm free? What forces shape the range of my choices? Where did my desires actually come from? Then, start tracing the architecture of control. Follow the money. Follow the media. Follow the incentives. See how systems reward obedience, distract from injustice, and redefine rebellion as dysfunction. But most importantly, start reclaiming your freedom by making choices that cost you something. Real freedom is rarely convenient. It often isolates you. It forces you to abandon praise, comfort, and status. It asks you to think outside of accepted narratives, to endure discomfort, and to risk being misunderstood. That's why so few people truly pursue it. Because true freedom isn't just the ability to choose. It's the willingness to question why you were ever given those choices in the first place. It's not loud. It's not branded. It doesn't scream with flags and slogans. It whispers in the space between what you believe and what you fear to ask. Next is a paradox where safety became the new danger. Safety that bred vulnerability. Safety is one of the most basic human needs. We seek it instinctively, gravitating towards shelter, structure, predictability. Societies are built around safety: laws, fences, warnings, surveillance, insurance. On the surface, it seems obvious. More safety equals less harm. But what if the pursuit of safety, taken too far, starts to do the opposite? What if, in insulating ourselves from risk, discomfort, or challenge, we become weaker, more fragile, and ultimately more vulnerable? This is the paradox. Safety that bred vulnerability. We begin life completely dependent. Safety is essential for survival. But as we grow, so does our need to encounter difficulty. Struggle builds resilience. Risk teaches decision-making. Pain develops empathy. Yet in modern societies, we often try to eliminate those very conditions. We build environments where everything is controlled, where failure is padded, where the unknown is minimized. And while it feels good in the short term, it quietly erodes the very strengths we need to navigate life. Take parenting, for example. The helicopter parent doesn't want their child to get hurt, so they intervene constantly, resolving every conflict, preventing every fall, overscheduling every moment. The result? A child who never learns how to solve problems, handle failure, or sit with discomfort. They grow up technically safe, but emotionally unequipped for the real world. When life inevitably demands resilience, they crumble. Safety, in this case, has created a new kind of danger. In technology, we see this paradox play out in our reliance on convenience. GPS means we never get lost, but also that we lose the skill of navigation. Search engines mean we never have to remember facts, but also that we struggle to retain knowledge. Autocorrect means we don't need to spell, but it also atrophies our attention to language. Every safety net, every shortcut, slowly steals a capacity we once had. We're safer, yes, but also more dependent. The same pattern applies to emotional safety. In many social circles today, the value of being safe from offense, discomfort, or opposing views is prioritized above all. While this can protect people from genuine harm, it can also create intellectual fragility. If someone has never had their ideas challenged, never sat with the discomfort of disagreement, they may mistake discomfort for danger. They start to believe that all opposition is threat, all tension is trauma, all friction is violence. And that belief leads to a brittle mind, one that can't handle complexity, ambiguity, or growth. There's also a geopolitical version of this paradox. Nations obsessed with security, spending billions on surveillance, policing, and military, often end up alienating their own citizens and provoking external threats. The harder they clamp down to create order, the more they breed rebellion, resentment, and chaos. The desire for safety turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy of insecurity. And on a personal level, we see people who live in psychological lockdown. They avoid risks, avoid new relationships, avoid failure. They build emotional bunkers to keep themselves safe. But in doing so, they miss life. They miss love. They miss the depth that only vulnerability can bring. They end up isolated. Not because the world is too dangerous, but because they've armored themselves against every possible crack. The illusion of absolute safety is comforting, but it's also paralyzing. We begin to fear anything uncertain. We avoid challenge. We demand guarantees. But the truth is, life is inherently unsafe, and trying to remove all threat often removes all aliveness. You can't grow without risk. You can't love without the possibility of heartbreak. You can't create without the chance of failure. The safety we chase often comes at the expense of the very experiences that give life depth and meaning. So what's the alternative? It's not recklessness. It's not romanticizing suffering. It's calculated exposure. It's choosing experiences that challenge you, not to break you, but to stretch you. It's recognizing that discomfort is not always a problem. It's often a signal of growth. It's building anti-fragility, the ability to become stronger through stress. True safety isn't found in never falling. It's found in learning how to rise. It means teaching children how to struggle wisely. It means building systems that tolerate dissent. It means being willing to feel hurt, to fail, to question, to stretch. It means recognizing that bubble wrapping, life only delays the inevitable and makes us less prepared when it finally comes. Because the real danger is not outside the bubble. The real danger is what happens when you believe the bubble is life. Safety should never be the goal. Resilience should be. Next is a paradox where freedom became another form of control. Autonomy that was engineered. Autonomy is one of the most sacred ideals in modern society. The freedom to think for yourself, to make your own choices, to live on your own terms. It's enshrined in human rights, glorified in culture, and marketed endlessly. From the day we're born, we're told to grow into independence, be your own person, follow your own path. But in a world engineered to shape minds, desires, and decisions, how free are we really? This is the paradox. Autonomy that was engineered. At first glance, autonomy seems obvious. You choose your clothes, your career, your politics, your passions. You feel like the author of your life. But dig deeper, and the architecture of your choices begins to reveal itself. Why do you prefer one brand over another? Why does a certain lifestyle appeal to you? Why do you associate success with a house, a job title, or a relationship model? Were these preferences born from your soul or installed through subtle programming? We're living in a time where freedom is sold to us through algorithms. You scroll and you're shown content tailored to your profile. Ads predict your needs. Social media feeds are curated to reflect your tastes, but also to shape them. Each like, click, and view feeds a system that gets better at telling you what you want, even before you know you want it. And because it feels personalized, it feels authentic. But what if your autonomy is just engineered alignment? Take the illusion of choice. You think you're making independent decisions, but most of your options were pre-selected. You pick from a menu someone else wrote. You debate within boundaries someone else set. The colors, the language, the pacing of your experience, it's all been optimized. You're not deciding freely. You're navigating a maze built by someone else, tricked into believing you're running in the open. Even your beliefs can be engineered. The articles you read, the influencers you follow, the narratives you absorb, all feed a perception of the world that reinforces what you already think. Echo chambers aren't just accidents. They're strategic designs that polarize thought while making people feel more informed. You believe you're thinking critically, but you're really consuming pre-filtered data that affirms your existing worldview. This engineered autonomy extends to identity. You're told to be yourself, but only in marketable ways. You express yourself through brands, aesthetics, opinions that align with social trends. You feel unique, but you're echoing a collective script. Even rebellion is commodified. You're encouraged to stand out, but within a narrow range of acceptable difference. Autonomy becomes a costume, not a compass. And then there's the internalization of this illusion. You believe you're failing when you don't thrive in the system, not realizing the game was never fair. You compare your choices, your path, your identity, to a matrix of ideals that were never truly yours. You believe your struggles are personal failures, not systemic consequences of an environment built to guide you subtly towards certain outcomes. But perhaps the most painful aspect of this paradox is that it feels good. Engineered autonomy feels smooth. Personalized ads feel convenient. Curated news feels smart. Branded identity feels empowering. There's a dopamine rush in believing you're in control. It keeps you from questioning the deeper mechanisms underneath. After all, who wants to dismantle something that feels like freedom? So how do we begin to reclaim true autonomy? First, by slowing down. The pace of modern life is designed to prevent reflection. When you move fast, you react more than you respond. You consume without questioning. You adopt ideas without examining them. Start noticing where your impulses come from. Why are you drawn to that idea, that product, that opinion? What fear or desire is being tapped? Awareness interrupts the automation. Second, create friction. Don't always take the easy route. Seek out opposing views. Read things that challenge your beliefs. Choose media sources that don't agree with each other. Resist the urge to curate your environment until it becomes an echo. Real autonomy thrives in contrast, not comfort. Third, reconnect with internal authority. Before making big decisions, sit with yourself in silence. Strip away what the world wants, what culture expects, what algorithms suggest. Ask, what do I actually believe? What do I truly want? These are not quick answers, but pursuing them leads you back to a self that hasn't been pre-installed. Fourth, reframe freedom. True autonomy isn't about doing whatever you want, whenever you want. It's about choosing consciously, even when it's inconvenient. It's about being free not just from control, but from programming, from needing approval, from being manipulated by fear, trends, or convenience. True autonomy is quieter, less glamorous, but it's yours. And finally, accept that no one is fully autonomous. We're all influenced, shaped, biased. The goal is not perfect independence, but conscious participation. To know when you're being influenced and choose whether to accept it. To see the system, not to escape it entirely, but to navigate it with clarity. Because in a world where freedom is marketed and individuality is molded, true autonomy isn't loud, it's aware. And awareness is the first real act of rebellion. Next is a paradox where control became the root of chaos. Control that created disorder. Control promises peace. When life feels chaotic, we instinctively tighten our grip. We make plans, set boundaries, build routines, draw lines. Control feels like a shield, something that protects us from the unpredictability of people, emotions, and the world at large. We associate it with order, success, even sanity. And yet, the harder we try to control things, the more fractured everything seems to become. This is the paradox: control that created disorder. Control begins innocently. A person who grew up in a volatile household may control their adult environment obsessively, always cleaning, always planning, never allowing spontaneity. It gives them a sense of stability. A student, anxious about failure, micromanages every detail of their life, calendars, apps, color-coded notes, until they feel like a machine. A partner, scared of being hurt, controls the relationship with rules, testing, surveillance. At first, it feels responsible, even smart. But control, once it becomes chronic, is no longer about managing reality. It becomes about avoiding discomfort. The truth is, most of life is unmanageable. Emotions fluctuate. People are unpredictable. Accidents happen. Plans fail. The more we try to lock everything into predictability, the more stressed we become by every deviation. Control gives the illusion of order, but it demands a cost: constant vigilance. And vigilance isn't peace, it's anxiety in disguise. This paradox is deeply embedded in relationships. A parent tries to control their child's behavior to ensure they grow up right, but ends up raising someone either rebellious or fearful. A friend tries to manage another's choices for their own good, but ends up pushing them away. A partner tries to control love, jealousy, demands, manipulation, all in the name of closeness, but ends up creating distance. Control in relationships masquerades as care, but its root is often fear. Fear of abandonment, of betrayal, of loss. And fear is a poor foundation for love. In the workplace, control is seen as leadership. Managers track every minute, every metric, every interaction. But excessive control leads to resentment, disengagement, burnout. Creativity suffocates under micromanagement. Trust erodes. People follow rules, but not with passion. The result? An organization that looks neat on the outside, but is dying on the inside. Even internally, we try to control ourselves. We repress emotions, hide flaws, silence doubts. We curate our image, suppress our grief, deny our anger. But what we repress doesn't disappear, it festers. A person who controls their sadness might develop chronic anxiety. One who suppresses rage may implode under pressure. In trying to control the chaos within, we often create more chaos. It just moves underground. What's most disturbing about this paradox is how seductive control can be. It makes us feel powerful. It gives us structure. It temporarily soothes our nerves. But it becomes a trap. Because once we taste control, we want more. And when control fails, as it always does, we blame ourselves. So we tighten further. The more life slips out of our hands, the tighter we clench. And the tighter we clench, the more we destroy the very flow we're trying to protect. Eventually, control doesn't just fail, it backfires. The person who controls their partner loses them. The parent who controls their child finds they can no longer communicate. The individual who controls their life to the last detail becomes exhausted, joyless, rigid. The house may be spotless, the calendar may be full, but inside, there is only tension. This is the disorder that control creates. A world that looks clean but feels hollow. So what's the alternative? Is the answer chaos, carelessness? No. The answer is flexibility. The opposite of control isn't recklessness. It's trust. Trust in others. Trust in yourself. Trust in life's rhythms. Trust that you can respond to what comes, even if you can't predict it. Control is about fear. Trust is about capacity. Start by loosening the grip. Let one thing go, one rule, one expectation, one deadline. See what happens. Observe what fears come up. Sit with them. Don't rush to replace the old structure with a new one. Sometimes the space left by control is exactly where healing begins. Then practice responsive action rather than preemptive force. Instead of trying to prevent every problem, learn to meet them when they arrive. Develop your adaptability instead of your resistance. Not everything has to be planned. Not everything has to go right. And not everything that feels messy is actually wrong. Also, learn to distinguish between control and care. Care listens. Control commands. Care adapts. Control enforces. You can care deeply for someone without needing to dictate their every move. You can care for yourself without scheduling every second. Often, the most nurturing thing we can do is let go, not of responsibility, but of rigidity. Lastly, redefine what peace means. If your peace depends on everything going according to plan, it's not peace, it's control in a nice outfit. True peace comes from inner resilience, from knowing that even if things fall apart, you won't. And that kind of peace can't be managed. It must be built. Because at the heart of this paradox is a revelation. Control might create short-term order, but it often destroys long-term harmony. And sometimes, the most powerful act of control is choosing to let things unfold. Next is a paradox where pleasure turned into suffering by excess, indulgence that diminished joy. Pleasure is among life's purest gifts. A good meal, a warm touch, a deep laugh, a night of music and freedom. These moments are not just fleeting joys. They are reminders that we are alive. Indulgence, when occasional and mindful, can enhance our well-being. It satisfies cravings, relieves tension, celebrates victories, and adds beauty to the ordinary. Yet something strange happens when indulgence becomes frequent, automatic, or unchecked. The joy it once sparked begins to fade. The more we chase it, the more elusive it becomes. This is the paradox. Indulgence that diminished joy. Modern life has engineered indulgence to be constant. Food delivery, streaming services, pornography, fast fashion, endless scrolling. Nearly every desire can now be satisfied instantly. What once felt like a treat now feels like routine. But the human mind isn't wired for non-stop satisfaction. Pleasure, by nature, is fleeting. It depends on contrast, on novelty, on absence that builds anticipation. When indulgence becomes default, our senses dull. The extraordinary becomes ordinary. The joy becomes muted. Consider food. A rich dessert at the end of a celebration can be a moment of pure delight. But if you eat that same dessert every night, it becomes expected. The first bite no longer brings wonder, it brings boredom. You begin eating not because you're hungry or celebrating, but because the habit has hollowed into reflex, the pleasure plateaus, and yet you keep indulging, hoping to feel what you once felt. But joy, unlike calories, can't be forced. This applies to experiences too. The traveler who once found magic in discovering a new country may eventually become numb, collecting destinations like trophies, chasing a high that fades more quickly each time. The person who binge watches shows night after night may realize they no longer remember what they've seen, only that they were trying to escape the silence. The couple who once shared passionate intimacy may come to treat it as routine, a checkbox, a mechanical indulgence without presence. Why does this happen? Because indulgence without pause collapses into excess. And excess isn't neutral, it erodes appreciation. Pleasure requires contrast, space, and recovery. Without those, it becomes self-defeating. The pleasure center in the brain becomes desensitized. What once thrilled now barely registers. So you reach for more sugar, more noise, more dopamine. But instead of satisfaction, you get restlessness. Worse still, indulgence often morphs into compulsion. What begins as a choice becomes a craving. You no longer ask, "Do I want this?" but rather, "Why can't I stop this?" The indulgence becomes avoidance, a way to distract from discomfort, loneliness, meaninglessness. And when the high wears off, it leaves behind a hollowness that demands to be filled again. This is how joy becomes a loop, not of fulfillment, but of chasing. In some cases, indulgence even creates suffering. Think of the addict whose substance brings brief euphoria but long-term ruin. Think of the spender whose shopping brings a momentary thrill but ends in debt and anxiety. Think of the workaholic who indulges in success but feels empty at every milestone. In each scenario, pleasure is sought to soothe, but ends up deepening the pain it tries to mask. Yet society rarely warns us of this. We're told we deserve to treat ourselves, to live our best lives, to seek comfort and luxury and abundance. And while these messages can be empowering in moderation, they become traps when we begin to believe that more is always better. The culture of indulgence promises happiness, but it rarely delivers sustained joy. So how do we escape this paradox? First, we must reintroduce intentionality. Before indulging, pause, ask, am I savoring this or escaping something? Does this bring presence or numbness? Reconnect with the why behind your indulgence. The act isn't always the problem. It's the automaticity that steals its meaning. Second, revalue scarcity. Not everything needs to be available all the time. When you reintroduce limits, whether through fasting, unplugging, abstaining, or simply waiting, you allow space for anticipation, which amplifies appreciation. What you delay becomes sacred. What you overconsume becomes forgettable. Third, cultivate alternative joys, those that don't rely on indulgence. These are often quieter: a walk without your phone, a deep conversation, making something with your hands, serving someone else. They don't offer instant gratification, but they often leave a deeper imprint. And over time, they restore your sensitivity to real pleasure. Lastly, practice gratitude in small doses. It's not about being grateful for everything all the time. It's about slowing down enough to feel the warmth of sunlight on your skin, or the first sip of coffee, or the laughter of a friend. These are micro pleasures, too easily missed in a world of overstimulation, but they are the foundation of a joy that doesn't diminish with use. The heart of this paradox is this: indulgence feels like the answer to desire, but joy often lives in restraint. Because when everything is always available, nothing feels worth waiting for. And sometimes, the deepest pleasure is in knowing when to stop. Next is a paradox where belonging cost authenticity, belonging that required disguise. Every human being has a fundamental need to belong. It's encoded in our biology, our psychology, our evolution. Belonging provides safety, purpose, identity, and love. From ancient tribes to modern social networks, we crave connection, to feel seen, accepted, and part of something bigger than ourselves. But what if the very thing we need most, belonging, comes at a hidden cost? What if, to be accepted, we must wear a mask, mute our truth, or play a role? This is the paradox, belonging that required disguise. In many social environments, acceptance is conditional. You're welcomed, but only if you conform. You're loved, but only if you behave. You're part of the group, but only if you fit the mold. And so we learn to disguise ourselves, sometimes subtly, sometimes completely. We laugh at jokes we don't find funny. We nod at ideas we secretly reject. We dress, speak, and think in ways designed to blend in, not because it's who we are, but because we fear what happens if we don't. This starts early. Children pick up on the cues of what earns them approval: obedience, performance, emotional, suppression. A boy who cries too much is told to toughen up. A girl who speaks too boldly is called difficult. And from that moment, identity splits. There's the presented self and the protected self. One is shown to the world. The other is tucked away, buried under layers of adaptation. As we grow, we carry this performance into friendships, classrooms, boardrooms, and even our own families. We become experts in social camouflage, often without realizing it. We curate our personalities depending on the room we enter. Around co-workers, we're efficient. Around old friends, we're nostalgic. Around romantic partners, we're idealized. Around strangers, we're polite. All of this seems normal until we forget what's real and what's rehearsed. The pain of this paradox doesn't always come from external rejection. Sometimes it's internal. You get what you thought you wanted: acceptance, popularity, validation, but feels strangely hollow. You've been seen, yes, but not as yourself. And so the love you receive doesn't land. The connection doesn't satisfy. Because deep down, you know, they love the costume, not the core. In extreme cases, this leads to a crisis of identity. You've worn the mask so long, you no longer know where it ends and you begin. Every decision is filtered through a lens of, will they still like me if? Your real desires get second-guessed. Your real opinions get watered down. Your real self becomes a stranger. This paradox intensifies in marginalized communities. For many people of color, LGBTQ+ individuals, immigrants, or neurodivergent folks, the pressure to conform isn't just social, it can be existential. Safety, employment, or survival may depend on masking parts of identity. The need to belong is not just about connection, it's about being allowed to exist without threat. And that reality makes the disguise feel necessary, even righteous. But it still costs something: authenticity, wholeness. In the digital world, this paradox is supercharged. Social media rewards presentation over presence, branding over being. We craft online versions of ourselves optimized for likes, shares, relatability. But with each filtered post, we drift further from our unedited truth. We belong in the algorithm, but not in our actual lives. So how do we escape this paradox? First, recognize that true belonging cannot be bargained for. If you have to disguise yourself to be accepted, you're not truly belonging. You're performing for permission. Belonging that costs your truth isn't belonging. It's conditional access. Second, begin practicing micro-honesty. You don't have to bare your soul to everyone, but start inserting slivers of your true self into your daily interactions. Speak your opinion, even if it's unpopular. Share something vulnerable, even if it risks awkwardness. Say no, even if you fear disappointment. These tiny acts are breadcrumbs back to the self. Third, reevaluate your circles. Ask, do the people around me make space for all of me, or just the convenient parts? Do I feel freer or smaller when I'm with them? Sometimes the problem isn't you, it's the room you're trying to fit into. A mask is only necessary when the space is unsafe. Finally, understand that the fear of rejection will never fully go away, but neither will the longing to be known. You must choose which ache you can live with. The ache of being excluded as your true self, or the ache of being included as someone you're not. Because here's the quiet tragedy of this paradox. You can spend your whole life trying to belong, only to realize that you never belonged to yourself. Real belonging doesn't require a disguise, it requires courage. Next is a paradox where doubt itself becomes reinforcement, doubt that strengthens belief. We're taught that doubt is the enemy of belief, that it weakens conviction, breaks faith, and leads people away from what they once held sacred. Doubt, in this framework, is seen as erosion, a crack in the wall of certainty. If you start doubting your beliefs, the story goes, they'll eventually collapse. But what if doubt doesn't destroy belief? What if instead it deepens it, making it stronger, more stubborn, more immune to facts and reason? This is the paradox, doubt that strengthens belief. This may sound contradictory, but it's a well-documented psychological phenomenon, especially in the realm of manipulation and mind control. When someone is presented with information that challenges a deeply held belief, their instinct isn't always to reassess. It's often to dig in deeper. They begin defending the belief more aggressively, searching for confirmation, demonizing dissenters and dismissing opposing facts as lies or propaganda. Why? Because belief is rarely just about logic, it's about identity. The stronger a belief is tied to someone's sense of self, the more threatening doubt becomes. Doubt isn't just an idea, it's an attack. It's a threat to who they are, who they've been, and the community or culture they belong to. So instead of letting the doubt unravel the belief, they absorb it. They reinterpret the doubt as persecution, as a test, as a sign they're on the right path. This is where the paradox becomes dangerous. Because the more someone is doubted or challenged, the more they feel validated. If they're trying this hard to disprove me, they think, I must be onto something. Doubt becomes fuel, opposition becomes proof. and the belief becomes fireproof, not because it's true, but because it's been forged in the flames of resistance. We see this in conspiracy theories all the time. When believers are presented with contradictory evidence, they often claim the evidence itself is part of the cover-up. When their ideas are debunked, they don't retreat, they double down. Of course, they want you to think it's fake, they'll say. That's how deep it goes. In this way, doubt strengthens belief by becoming part of the belief. The system absorbs the challenge and uses it as a defense. But it's not just conspiracy theorists. This paradox plays out in religion, politics, ideology, and even personal relationships. Take religion, for example. A person raised in a rigid faith tradition may begin to question certain doctrines. They feel cognitive dissonance, an internal clash between their beliefs and their lived experience. But instead of reassessing, they are told their doubt is a test from a higher power, that it's a trick from evil forces, that doubt itself is part of the path to deeper faith. So they pray harder, study more, submit further. The belief system reabsorbs the doubt and comes out stronger, less flexible, but more entrenched. In politics, it's the same. A person who supports a controversial figure might see news reports or first-hand evidence of corruption, cruelty, or lies. Instead of reconsidering, they're told the media is biased, the facts are fabricated, the sources are compromised. The doubt doesn't crack the belief, it solidifies it. Because now the person isn't just defending a politician, they're defending their own worldview, their tribe, their moral clarity. And in toxic relationships, we see another version of this. A person may start to doubt their partner's honesty or intentions, but then the partner gaslights them, guilt trips them, or insists that doubt is betrayal. So the doubting partner silences themselves. They suppress the voice inside. And every time that voice tries to return, they remind themselves, I need to have more faith. Maybe it's just me. In this way, doubt becomes an internal weapon, a tool of self-policing. The emotional mechanism behind this paradox is fear. Doubt is scary. It threatens to unmoor us from the things we've built our lives around. If you stop believing, what happens to your community, your purpose, your memories? Doubt doesn't just ask you to change your mind. It asks you to rewrite your story. That's why many people would rather reinforce a belief, even if it's false, than confront the emptiness of losing it. So how do you escape this paradox? First, you must stop treating doubt as failure. Doubt isn't weakness, it's awareness. It's the beginning of intelligence. Doubt means you're thinking, questioning, paying attention. But doubt only leads to clarity when you're allowed to explore it without fear. Second, learn to recognize belief systems that punish or explain away your doubt. If questioning something makes you feel guilty, ashamed, or scared, you're likely not inside a truth-seeking system, you're inside a control structure. Real truth welcomes scrutiny. It doesn't hide behind authority or shame. Third, learn to sit with doubt without rushing to resolve it. The need to feel sure can be a trap. Certainty is comforting, but often blinding. Let your doubts breathe. Let them teach you. Not every question needs an immediate answer, because real growth doesn't come from never doubting. It comes from doubting and still having the courage to ask, what else might be true? Next is a paradox where freedom demanded obedience to belong, freedom that required submission. Freedom is the highest ideal in many societies. We are told to chase it, to fight for it, to protect it. Freedom means autonomy, choice, expression, movement, the ability to live on your own terms. Nations are built on it. Revolutions are waged in its name. And yet, in some of the freest societies on earth, people feel trapped, watched, silenced, or strangely obligated to conform. How can that be? How can freedom, the very thing we're promised, demand our obedience? This is the paradox. Freedom that required submission. It begins with a lie wrapped in a beautiful package. You are free, as long as you agree with us. You can say anything, so long as it's the right thing. You can be yourself, so long as that self is acceptable. You can believe what you want, so long as it aligns with the dominant narrative. And if you stray, if you question, if you push back, you're labeled problematic, disloyal, toxic, extremist. Freedom, it turns out, has terms and conditions. This paradox reveals itself in environments that claim to be open but punish dissent, in workplaces that preach innovation but silence whistleblowers, in political systems that advertise liberty but crush opposition, in online spaces that promote expression but enforce rigid codes of behavior. What masquerades as liberty is often a performance, freedom as spectacle, not as substance. Social media has amplified this illusion. Platforms give everyone a voice, theoretically, but those voices are policed, not always by institutions, but by each other. Call-out culture, public, shaming, cancel cascades. These are not new tools of state oppression. They are peer-enforced obedience in the name of virtue. Say the wrong thing and you're exiled. Stay quiet and you're complicit. So, people begin to curate, not out of integrity, but out of fear. Their freedom becomes a performance of allegiance. This creates a chilling effect. Individuals become so afraid of the social consequences of nonconformity that they stop exploring ideas. They say only what is safe. They post only what is approved. They present versions of themselves designed for applause, not authenticity. In this way, freedom is preserved only in form, not in function. But the paradox goes deeper than politics or culture. It touches even our inner world. Consider the modern idea of freedom as personal liberation. Be yourself. Follow your dreams. Break the rules. Escape tradition. Sounds empowering, right? And it can be. But what happens when this notion of freedom becomes its own kind of dogma? You must always be authentic. You must always choose passion over practicality. You must reject dependence, tradition, sacrifice. Suddenly, if you choose stability over risk, commitment over exploration, family over freedom, you're seen as having failed yourself. This too is submission to a new cultural script, a new expectation, a new standard. One that defines freedom so narrowly that even choosing to live differently becomes suspect. You're not truly free, they say, unless you live a particular kind of liberated life. But what if your version of freedom is routine, or religion, or responsibility? Who gets to decide? At its worst, this paradox creates a kind of invisible prison. People are told they're free, but monitored for any deviation. They are invited to express themselves, but punished if that expression isn't palatable. And so, they internalize the pressure. They become their own enforcers. They shrink their choices before anyone else has to. They obey not because they're forced, but because they've been trained to believe that obedience is the price of belonging. So how do we escape this paradox? First, by recognizing that true freedom requires tolerance for discomfort. If a society, or a friend group, or an ideology can only function when everyone agrees, then it is not free. Real liberty includes space for discomfort, disagreement, contradiction. It means allowing others to be wrong. It means resisting the urge to control or exile. Second, we must reclaim the right to define freedom individually. Not every act of rebellion is freedom. Not every tradition is oppression. For some, freedom means solitude. For others, it means connection. For some, it means questioning everything. For others, it means committing deeply. There is no single blueprint, and anyone who tries to sell you one is selling submission disguised as liberation. Third, resist the performance. Ask yourself, am I saying this because I believe it, or because I fear the consequences if I don't? Am I living this way because it's true to me, or because it's safe within my community? These questions are unsettling, but they are essential, because submission begins where honesty ends. Finally, protect the freedom of others, even when you disagree. This is the hardest test. True belief in freedom is not proven by how you defend those who agree with you, but by how you tolerate those who don't. It's easy to support liberty when it's convenient. The real challenge is when it's messy, unpopular, or uncomfortable. Because that's the truth at the heart of this paradox. Freedom that can only exist through obedience isn't freedom. It's just another form of control, with a prettier mask. Next is a paradox, where comfort became the tool of manipulation, nurturing that conditioned obedience. Nurturing is supposed to be a force of care, safety, and growth. From infancy, we learn to associate comfort with trust, kindness with love, and warmth with belonging. A nurturing presence, whether a parent, teacher, mentor, or leader, can transform lives. It soothes anxiety, builds confidence, and fosters development. But what happens when nurturing is no longer about growth, but about control? What if the comfort you're given is tied to compliance? This is the paradox, nurturing that conditioned obedience. In many cases, this paradox begins in childhood. A child learns that love comes with conditions. Praise is given when they behave. Affection is offered when they follow the rules. When they rebel, it's withdrawn. Over time, they internalize a message, I must be good to be loved. The nurturing doesn't feel false, it feels earned. But beneath the warmth is a quiet form of training, not toward independence, but toward obedience. The result? Adults who struggle to set boundaries, who feel guilty when they say no, who seek validation by being agreeable, pleasing, unproblematic. They become experts at reading emotional cues, anticipating needs, avoiding conflict. They become good, not because they're naturally obedient, but because they were taught that love depends on it. This dynamic isn't just personal, it's systemic. In schools, students are rewarded not for curiosity, but for compliance. The good kids are the quiet ones, the ones who raise hands, follow instructions, don't disrupt. Even in workplaces, nurturing from a manager often comes in the form of guidance that's really about aligning with the system. You're praised when you fit the mold, when you adapt, when you support the mission without question. Mentorship becomes loyalty, care becomes control disguised as kindness. And perhaps the most insidious form of this paradox exists in relationships. A partner may offer care, softness, emotional attentiveness, but only when you behave in a way that supports their needs or ego. The moment you assert yourself, express discontent, or break the pattern, the nurturing disappears. You're met with silence, coldness, withdrawal. So you adjust. You become more careful. You learn that comfort is transactional. This conditioning is powerful because it doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like love. You don't see yourself as being controlled. You see yourself as being supported, but that support is contingent. The safety is temporary. And deep down, something begins to fracture. Your choices become performative. Your identity bends to maintain harmony. You may even convince yourself that this is the only kind of love you're capable of receiving. What makes this paradox especially difficult to detect is how socially acceptable it is. People praise you for being selfless, agreeable, nurturing in return. You're seen as dependable, likable. But your internal world may be filled with resentment, exhaustion, and a silent scream to be yourself without punishment. On a broader scale, governments, religions, and ideologies have long used this form of nurturing control. Citizens are rewarded with safety and order, so long as they conform. Obedience is called loyalty. Dissent is seen as betrayal. Comfort becomes a form of pacification. When people feel nurtured, they're less likely to resist, even when that nurturing subtly erodes their freedom. So how do we escape this loop? The first step is recognition. Ask yourself, have I been taught that love must be earned? Do I only feel safe when I'm being agreeable? Is there a cost to my comfort? These questions are not meant to shame, but to illuminate, because awareness is the first crack in any well-crafted illusion. Second, begin to redefine what nurturing means. Real nurturing supports your growth, not your silence. It encourages your truth, not just your compliance. It allows room for disagreement, not just reward for conformity. Test the relationships in your life. Can you say no and still feel loved? Can you change and still be embraced? If the answer is no, you're not being nurtured, you're being trained. Third, practice discomfort. Not recklessly, but intentionally. Allow yourself to disappoint someone who expects you to play a role. Speak your mind in a space where you're used to staying quiet. Set a boundary, even if it feels like rejection. Over time, these small rebellions retrain your nervous system. They remind you that safety doesn't come from obedience, it comes from authenticity. Fourth, if you're in the position of being a nurturer, parent, teacher, leader, reflect on your influence. Are you offering care to empower or to guide someone toward your preferred outcome? Real nurturing involves letting go. It trusts that others can grow without being shaped entirely in your image. It's less about molding and more about mirroring, seeing someone as they are and loving them anyway. Finally, recognize that real love doesn't disappear when you disobey. It doesn't demand that you contort yourself. It doesn't retreat when you become inconvenient. If someone's care feels conditional, it probably is, and you deserve better. Because at the core of this paradox is a choice. Will you keep accepting comfort that keeps you small, or will you risk discomfort for a love that sees your whole self? Next, we'll examine a paradox where hope doesn't save, It delays the revolution, hope that delayed action. Hope is supposed to be our lifeline. In times of despair, injustice, or chaos, it's the gentle whisper that keeps us going. We're told to hold on to hope, to believe in better days, to trust that change is coming. Entire movements, religions, and revolutions have been built on the foundation of hope. But what if hope doesn't always heal? What if it sometimes harms by pacifying, by postponing, by persuading us to wait instead of act? This is the paradox. Hope that delayed action. The deeper we dive into human psychology, the clearer it becomes. Hope can become a subtle form of sedation. When the world feels unbearable, we cling to hope like a drug. It numbs the pain just enough. It gives us something to look forward to. But if hope is not paired with movement, it becomes a loop, a distraction, a spiritual waiting room. We tell ourselves, things will get better soon. Someone will fix this. The universe has a plan. And while we repeat these mantras, time passes, injustice grows, systems solidify, and the opportunity for meaningful change slips further away. This kind of hope isn't empowering, it's paralyzing. Consider political systems. Countless citizens in broken democracies or authoritarian regimes have been told for decades, change is around the corner. They're urged to be patient, to keep voting, to believe in reform. But behind the curtain, the same power structures remain untouched. People wait and wait for elections, for justice, for progress, and nothing arrives. Yet the hope remains. It sustains them just enough to prevent revolt, but not enough to create transformation. The result? Stability without progress. Peace without justice. In oppressive workplaces, the same dynamic unfolds. Employees suffering under toxic management are often told, hang in there, things are about to turn around, or corporate is aware and planning changes, so they wait. They suppress their outrage. They silence their instincts. Hope becomes the leash that keeps them from walking out, from speaking up, from demanding better. Even in abusive relationships, hope plays a haunting role. Victims often hold on to memories of when things were good, or promises that things will improve. He said he's going to change. She's just under stress. It's not always like this. Hope convinces them to stay, to forgive, to overlook patterns. And with every passing day, the damage deepens. The longer they hope, the harder it becomes to leave. This isn't to say hope is inherently bad. It can be a source of resilience, a spark of vision, a reminder that possibility still exists. But when hope is used instead of action, when it becomes an excuse to tolerate suffering, it transforms into a tool of control. Institutions understand this. Leaders understand this. That's why they promise change without timelines. They offer visions of a better future without plans. Because the appearance of hope is often enough to keep people compliant. The mere suggestion that it's getting better is a powerful antidote to rebellion. And once people believe improvement is just a matter of time, they stop pushing, they stop fighting, they wait. That's how false hope becomes a system of delay, and it's not just external. Internally, we self-regulate using hope as a coping mechanism. I'll start that business once I feel ready. I'll leave this relationship when the time is right. I'll heal once I get past this rough patch. We put off action by clinging to an idealized future version of ourselves. But Readiness rarely arrives. The conditions never feel perfect, and life quietly slips by as we hope our way through it. So how do we escape this paradox? The answer isn't to abandon hope, it's to interrogate it. Ask yourself, is this hope inspiring me to move or lulling me into inaction? Is this hope rooted in reality, or is it just a fantasy keeping me comfortable? Real hope doesn't ask you to wait, it demands participation. It's not passive, it's urgent. It says, there's still time, but only if you act. Another key step is learning to recognize weaponized hope, the kind dangled in front of you to keep you docile. Look for vague promises. Look for goals with no roadmap. Look for leaders or partners who always say soon, but never say how. Hope without a timeline is a trap. Progress without accountability is fiction. Most importantly, reclaim your agency. Don't wait for better conditions to do what you already know is right. Don't wait for permission to take a step forward. Don't wait for someone else to hand you freedom. Hope can guide you, but only you can walk. Because hope that delays is just another form of fear. Hope that moves you, that risks, acts, builds, is the only kind that changes the world. Next is a paradox where expression became a mask for truth. Expression that concealed instead of revealed. We live in an era obsessed with expression. Share your thoughts, post your story, show your emotions, speak your truth. Platforms beg us to reveal ourselves, visually, verbally, vulnerably, from selfies to status updates, podcasts to personal essays. We're encouraged to peel back the layers, let the world in, and be authentic. Expression has become the modern currency of connection, identity, and power. But what if all this outward expression isn't revealing who we are, but hiding it? This is the paradox. Expression that concealed instead of revealed. At its core, expression should be about clarity, translating inner truth into outer form. A painting that captures pain, a journal entry that releases confusion, a spoken word that connects the isolated. But over time, expression became performance, and performance, while compelling, can become a mask. It shows something, but not necessarily the truth. Social media is the most obvious stage for this paradox. We curate our emotions into digestible captions. We choose photos that signal growth, peace, triumph. Even when we're breaking inside, vulnerability becomes a brand. Rage becomes an aesthetic. Healing becomes a storyline. We say, I'm being real, but we're still calculating the angle, the audience, the impact. Expression becomes less about truth and more about perception management. This isn't always sinister. Humans naturally shape their narratives. We present differently to our boss, our partner, our parent. But the danger arises when we start mistaking our performance for authenticity. We cry on camera but don't feel seen in real life. We write posts about boundaries but still let people walk all over us. We say we're doing the work, but deep down, we're just keeping up. Appearances. The more we express, the less we feel. The more we perform vulnerability, the more disconnected we become from actual intimacy. Even offline, the same pattern unfolds. People adopt scripts, language borrowed from therapy, social justice, spirituality. They speak in polished insights. They label every emotion, narrate every dynamic, dissect every relationship. But sometimes this polished expression becomes a barrier. Instead of raw feeling, we get analysis. Instead of presence, we get pretense. Truth is hidden behind perfect articulation. Pain is wrapped in intellectualism. Real emotions are replaced by well-rehearsed narratives. This is not a rejection of sharing. Expression, when real, is sacred. But real expression is often messy, incomplete, uncomfortable. It doesn't always earn likes. It doesn't always get applause. It might not trend or go viral. Because real expression risks being misunderstood. It risks being ignored. It risks not being enough. That's why we often hide behind expressions that feel safer, more stylized, more acceptable, more palatable. And the deeper truth, the one that needs air and space and slowness, remains unspoken. Sometimes we express not to connect, but to protect. We talk in order to avoid silence. We post to avoid presence. We explain feelings rather than feel them. We confess something public in order to avoid something private. We use our voice to dodge vulnerability, not to deepen it. In these moments, expression becomes camouflage, a beautiful, elaborate disguise. But the paradox goes even deeper. There are moments when our expression is honest, but the attention we receive distorts the truth. We write something real, and suddenly, people are watching. They respond. They expect more. They want the next chapter. And now, without realizing it, we start performing the version of ourselves that got the best reaction. We lock ourselves into a persona created by our most visible moment. Expression starts out authentic, but over time the audience edits the author. So how do we break free from this paradox? First, by reconnecting with silence. Not everything must be shared. Not every emotion needs a platform. Not every thought needs a caption. Sometimes the truest expression is one that stays private. A journal entry no one reads, a tear no one sees, a decision you make without announcing it. Silence isn't absence, it's depth. Second, ask yourself, who is this for? When you express something, notice your intention. Is it to release or to impress? To connect or to convince? To understand or to control? These questions don't have easy answers, but they point you back to honesty. Third, resist the urge to over-narrate your life. Let some moments remain unexplained. You don't owe anyone a continuous plotline. You are allowed to change your mind, to grow in secret, to hold contradictions. Real expression honors the unfinished, the evolving, the raw. Fourth, cultivate spaces of non-performance. People, places, or practices where you don't need to explain yourself, where your truth doesn't need translation. These are the places where your real voice can emerge, not polished, but pure. Because at the heart of this paradox is a longing to be known not for what we show, but for who we are when no one's watching. Expression should be a mirror, not a mask, a bridge, not a billboard, a way to be more real, not just more visible. Next is the final paradox in this sequence, one where awakening wasn't freedom, but another layer of illusion, awareness that became a trap. Awareness is often seen as the ultimate goal. We speak of waking up, becoming conscious, breaking free of illusion. From mindfulness practices to philosophical enlightenment, awareness promises clarity, liberation, truth. Once you see the mechanisms of control, manipulation, fear, you're supposed to be free. That's the promise. But what happens when awareness itself becomes another prison? When knowing doesn't liberate, but paralyzes? When seeing everything means you trust nothing, believe nothing, and feel disconnected from everything? This is the paradox, awareness that became a trap. At first, awakening feels like a gift. You begin noticing things others ignore. You question societal norms, emotional patterns, historical narratives. You feel smarter, sharper, more alive. You stop following blindly. You read between the lines. You pierce the veil. But then something subtle shifts. The more you see, the less you trust. The more you understand, the more cynical you become. Awareness, once a light, becomes a burning searchlight that never turns off. You begin analyzing everything. People's motives, your own, thoughts, global systems, even joy itself. Nothing is safe from scrutiny. Innocent moments lose their purity. Relationships feel like power exchanges. Emotions feel like chemical illusions. Media becomes propaganda. Culture becomes performance. Life becomes a mirror reflecting your own unrelenting analysis. What began as clarity now becomes overload. You can't stop seeing the patterns, the manipulation in advertising, the masks in social interactions, the conditioning in your responses. You know too much to relax, but not enough to escape. You're stuck in between, too awake to be blissfully ignorant, but too human to live as a detached observer. This creates a subtle kind of suffering, not pain in the physical sense, but existential tension. A constant hum of, what's the point? If everything is constructed, if every idea is loaded, if every truth has a counter-truth, then where do you stand? What do you hold on to? Your awareness, which once gave you freedom, now gives you no ground to rest on. This is the trap of meta-awareness, when your thoughts start watching themselves. You notice your joy, and then notice that you're noticing. You doubt your motivations, then doubt your doubts. You get caught in loops of observation where no action feels authentic, no feeling feels untainted. You don't live. You audit your experience in real time. And this self-monitoring isn't just exhausting, it's isolating. You begin to feel distant from others. Their joys feel shallow. Their routines feel programmed. Their beliefs feel naive. You want to connect, but there's a wall, because you can't unknow what you know. You envy their innocence, but can't return to it. You've outgrown the box, but have nowhere else to live. So you sit, aware, awake, and alone. Even worse, some people begin to wear their awareness as an identity. They become the awakened one. They look down on others, but are secretly just as trapped. Their ego is now built around seeing through everything, which means they can never let anything be real. Every encounter becomes a lesson, every person a reflection, every mistake a shadow. Growth becomes performance, vulnerability becomes branding, even humility becomes strategy. So how do you escape a trap made of awareness? The first step is surrender. Not to ignorance, but to imperfection. Life isn't meant to be fully decoded. Some things are worth feeling even if they're flawed. Some stories are worth believing, even if they're incomplete. Not because they're objectively true, but because they're meaningful to you. Meaning doesn't always come from analysis. It often comes from participation. Second, stop treating awareness like a ladder. There's no final level. No master insight that makes everything click. Truth isn't a peak, it's a landscape. You walk through it, lose your way, come back. Sometimes you need clarity, other times you need wonder. Let yourself rotate through the lenses. Let awareness be a tool, not a cage. Third, practice grounding. Awareness lives in the mind, but life lives in the body. Get back into sensations. Eat something slowly. Walk without thinking. Laugh without dissecting. Feel without naming. These small acts re-anchor you in the present, not as an observer, but as a participant. Fourth, cultivate mystery. Let go of the need to figure it all out. Not everything has a hidden message. Not every dream is a symbol. Not every failure is a lesson. Sometimes a tree is just a tree. Sometimes a hug is just a hug. Let life breathe without demanding that it explain itself to you. And finally, reconnect through simplicity. Awareness isn't about always knowing. It's about being with. Being with yourself, with others, with the moment. Let the world be flawed. Let yourself be confused. Let connection be imperfect. That's not blindness, it's grace. Because at its core, awareness was never meant to be the end. It was meant to be the beginning of gentleness, of integration, of being human again. And perhaps the greatest act of awareness is choosing to close your eyes just long enough to feel the world instead of dissect it. By now, you've walked through 25 paradoxes, each a mirror, each a trap, each a secret most people never pause to question. You've seen how trust can be manufactured, how freedom can be controlled, how even awareness, our most sacred tool, can turn against us. The deeper you look into human behavior, the clearer it becomes. The mind is not just shaped by what it sees, but by how it's taught to interpret what it sees. And sometimes, that interpretation is quietly engineered. This isn't a call to fear your own thoughts or distrust everyone around you. It's an invitation to pause before reacting, to notice the strings before you pull them, to ask not just what you believe, but why you believe it. Because in a world built to nudge, steer, and pacify, true freedom is not about escape. It's about awareness with compassion, knowing with humility, seeing the trap and choosing not to be bitter, but awake. These paradoxes don't offer easy answers. They offer tension. But within that tension lies something priceless, the power to reclaim your mind. Not perfectly, not once and for all, but gently, and again, and again.